on plastic pollutions. Yesterday we had a very intense working day talking about plastic recycling, energy law, circular economy aspects, the impact of the European Union in plastics reduction, in state legislation, also the impact of regulatory frameworks, civil society, and also the challenges of the packaging and packaging waste regulations, how circular economy is regulated, and how that is done in the Balearic Islands. And we ended up watching a bit of theater at the CRI Library courtyard. Today, on day 2, we begin with the panel called The Impact on Oceans, the impact of plastics pollution on oceans. As we know, oceans receive a lot of this pollution, and that has severe impacts on the ocean's health and the ecosystems. Today, we have Joaquim Rovira, a reader here at the Rovira University and researcher of the Technotox, Environmental Technology and Toxicology Research Center. And he will talk to us about plastics pollution, microplastics, and his talk is entitled Plastified. And we will give him the floor for him to give us his presentation. Thank you, Aitana, and thank you for this invitation to give this presentation. Obviously, he is not a jurist, I wanted to say, nor am I an expert in circular economy. Although this is a legal Congress, this is a multidisciplinary field. Therefore, it's important that we find synergies among the different fields that are interrelated, because regulations always refer back to technical criteria where they establish cutoff values when a risk is unacceptable, for example. And so it's good to listen to experts from other fields to have a complete view of plastics pollution. Okay, Aitana, thank you for that invitation again. And this presentation is called Plastified, or We Are Plastified, because we truly are plastified. And the subtitle is The Journey of Plastics from Our Clothing to our brains as microplastics. I'm sure you've seen this in the media, how microplastics have reached our brains. I always like to begin with this graph. It's from Scopus, a scientific database that takes up the number of articles. It's a search of the number of articles per year in which the title, abstract, or keywords, the word microplastic is present. As you can see, in 2008, just a couple days ago, there were 18 such articles. Only one of those 18 was really about microplastics in mollusks. And in 2023, we had 4,766, and by 2024, 6,463. And by 2025, we may reach 8 or 9 or maybe even 10,000. Our research group began working on the microplastics issue in around 2017, when the number of articles published was still manageable, 270 per year. And with all of this, I mean that this presentation is not updated. Yesterday or the day before, there are probably 20 or 30 articles published, and I'm sure some of them will provide new evidence on microplastics. I want to begin with a brief summary. I'm sure you talked a lot about plastics yesterday and the problem of plastics. Plastic is an amazing material with lots of properties. but it has four big problems. The first is its massive production in 2021, over 350 million tons of production, and that began after World War II. The production began after World War II. This massive production has just only ramped up since then, and even more so in recent years. What do we do with all this plastic? Nearly 40% of it is used for packaging, and a lot of it is single-use plastic, and that's a big problem. Around 16% is used for building and construction, 14% is used for textiles, clothing, polyester, polyamide, the clothes that we wear, football jerseys, sport clothing, the day-to-day clothing. They're 70% of the production becomes waste, of which 47% comes from waste, and 14% comes from textile again. And what is done with that waste? 40% is sent to the landfill. We hide it. We don't want to know any more about it. We just sweep it under the rug, so to speak. 25% is incinerated, revalued energetically in the best possible scenario. It is burned. So we invest all of these resources and energy and end up burning it. 90% is lost where? Somewhere in the environment, somewhere along the way, and only 16% is recycled. So the fallacy of plastics recycling is more than obvious, and the circularity of these plastics, again, is a fallacy. The third big problem of plastic is the time that these plastics last in the environment. A plastic bag can last 20 years, a toothbrush or diapers can even a plastic cup can last 450 years. So a plastic bottle or package that we use for 5 minutes can last in the environment for 500 years, and that is a big problem. And the fourth problem of plastics is the use that we make of them. Everyone is familiar with National Geographic, one of the first magazines to report on this topic, but it reaches the subscriber's home in the plastic bag where 4 or 5 more magazines could fit. And I won't say anything about the oranges or tangerines packaged in plastic with a little plastic fork. There's no natural protection for oranges or tangerines, just like bananas with a polyurethane tray, which cannot be recycled and generates problems. And at the Spanish level, we have some fried eggs from supermarket. They fried eggs and package them in plastic. And since that's very convenient, you could take it home. All this does is increase the plastics problem. But today, I'm not here to talk about plastic. I'm here to talk about my book, the research, my group's research. I'm here to talk about microplastics, okay? What are microplastics? Well, their name tells us what they are, but since scientifics are similar to jurists, when we're obsessed with these definitions of the problem and what each thing is, microplastics are a very small fragment of plastics from 5 millimeters to 1 micron. That is considered a microplastic. They can have a primary or secondary origin, and above all, they are insoluble in water. And what does this primary, secondary origin mean? It depends on how those microplastics reach the environment. If they are emitted in the 5 millimeter to 1 micron range, they are primary. Exfoliants form lotions that are prohibited in Europe, the synthetic fibers that are given off from our clothing, the particles from tires that peel off the tires and reach the environment. The secondary ones are the plastic bottles that are left in the environment, and with the action of the sun, friction, and waves, slowly breaks down into small particles called microplastics. Those microplastics are of a secondary origin. This has been a bit cut off, but okay. A study done on wastewater treatment plants. We have observed that each liter of water that leaves our homes through the sewer system contains 400 microplastics per liter. Those are the 369,000 microplastics per cubic meter, and those reach the wastewater treatment plants by washing our clothing, washing our synthetic clothing. Wastewater treatment plants are not designed to eliminate microplastics, and they do a good job, but the emissor, the origin, contains 13,000 microplastics per cubic meter. 90% are fibers, textile fibers, synthetic clothing fibers. And the rest of the microplastics, where are they left? In the so-called sludge, wastewater treatment sludge. They take out all the suspended solids and they produce sludge. Every kilo of this sludge has 133,000 microplastics. And much of that sludge, at least in Spain, is used as a agricultural fertilizer. So we return to the environment all the plastics that had been eliminated. So many European countries are considering the need to burn this sludge, treat it as a dangerous, hazardous waste product to prevent the re-entry of microplastics. So just in Catalonia, the capacity to process this water, it's 3 million cubic meters per day. If you multiply that by the number of microplastics, around 40 billion microplastics every day are emitted or are dumped into the ocean or the streams, and that is a bunch of microplastics. So if we are dumping microplastics into the sea or the river, it affects the marine environment. We did a study with beach sand from all Catalonia, from the northernmost touching France to the southernmost to the border with Valencia. We took samples of beach sand and measured the number of microplastics. On the column on the left, the large microplastics over half a millimeter. On the right, we have organized from north to south all the microplastics. And the orange bars are fibers, textile fibers. Our beach sand has a lot of textile fibers, and we find three main hotspots where there's accumulation of these microplastics. Southern Barcelona, because the currents of the marine water go from north to south, so the impact will always be greater in the south. There's a concentration of microplastics that come from the metropolitan area of Barcelona, from the wastewater treatment plants of Barcelona, and in Tarragona, where we find the highest levels of microplastics. Here in Tarragona, we have the casuistry of having this large petrochemical plant and having the sources of wastewater treatment with a very low level of dispersion. There's a certain concentration of them, that is. And in the delta of the Ebro River, the river carrying all the microplastics from upriver, Zaragoza, and even further up, they wash down all the microplastics and they end up in the delta. And if you're not familiar with the delta, this is an area in which mollusks, mussels, and other shellfish are produced. And so all those fibers that get through the wastewater treatment plants from our clothing, if we take these mussels and measure all the microplastics of 1 centimeter, this is what we find. All of these little lines are synthetic textile fibers. In the lower right-hand corner, that is a piece of film or a piece of a plastic bag from a supermarket that a mussel has also eaten. 20 mussels is usually a standard ration. This is what we eat. So after 1 year's time, a person who eats mussels, regular mussels, may eat 4 to 5 meters worth of fibers if you line them up. A big mussel eater, people who really like mussels, and I am one of them, we eat 11 meters worth of fiber. And that's quite a bit large part of a t-shirt. I don't know if it's a whole t-shirt, but 11 meters is quite a bit of thread. So we conducted a study with the Catalan Food Safety Agency to see if we could reduce these mussels. We took 20 mussels, 20 oysters, and 20 razor mussels, and we were able to measure the content just looking at the disinfected filtered water. We reduced from 9 to 4 microplastics by half, because when they grow, they eat the microplastics and they incorporate it into the muscles. And so we could not have clean or safe or microplastic-free microplastic-free food. So that is a problem, okay? But also in our drinking water, we have around 4 to 5 microplastics per liter. A liter of water, we drink this much microplastic, but the tap water, there's much less microplastic. We have to filter 20 liters to find 1 microplastic. So my advice to you is drink tap water. The filtering, the sand filtering, carbon filtering is very effective and it's quite good. And we've also analyzed other drinks, cola drinks, lemon drinks. I won't give the brand names, you can imagine what they are. I don't want any legal problems. If any arise, I will come to you. But in cola and lemon drinks, we find from 15 microplastics per liter, but also in wine and beer, 10 to 12 microplastics per liter. But if we analyze the cola refreshments or beverages, depending on how they are packaged, it's surprising. And what's the surprise? That the beverages that are canned or packaged in glass have fewer microplastics than those packaged in plastic bottles. We ran the experiment again, and we did it again and again because we couldn't make sense of it. But in the end, there are results that we haven't published yet. We're still working on it, but our hypothesis is that the plastic from the bottles, from an electrostatic effect, with the microplastic, they stay stuck to the bottle. In the case of plastic bottles, that's our hypothesis. Here's one of the microplastics that we found. It's not a snail. It is a microplastic that we found is a snail shape. It comes from the cap, the bottle cap. When you open the bottle, it rubs against the inside of the cap, and it fell inside. Some of them fall outside. This one fell inside, and we analyzed it. And in fact, we took a picture of the cap, and you can see the little notch, which is where this plastic came from. Right, so we have the food, we have the beverages, and these colleagues from the Netherlands found blood. These microplastics, we're not just drinking and eating them, and it's going through our intestines and our stomach. We find them in our blood, and if they're in our blood, they're going all around our body. We've said that microplastics of a size of 150 to 100 microns can pass through the intestinal barrier. Once they pass through the intestinal barrier, they can be distributed throughout our entire body. Obviously, they're also in our lungs, in the air that we're breathing because of the textile products here. It is an indoor contaminant. There are textile fibers floating around, and we have microplastics in our lungs. In our intestines, we also have microplastics. Our large intestine, the liver, the kidneys, everywhere. In the placenta, in the umbilical cord, in the Tarragona plaques, the plaque found inside our arteries, they found microplastics in the plaque. And it's believed, it's not known yet, but one of the hypotheses is that those microplastics can be a factor that makes cholesterol coagulate around them and begin to generate the atheroma plaque. But we've also found it in the brain. And this is where the journey that I had said ends, from the sweater to the brain. But these plastics do exist, but what adverse effects do they cause? That's a good question. It is a good question that just now we're beginning to intuit, or the scientists are beginning to enter and beginning to discover things. And what have we discovered? First of all, these microplastics can be a Trojan horse. The microplastics inside them, in their polymeric matrix, can have additives, chemical additives, flame retardants, coagulants, anti-static components, ultraviolet light protective agents that are not chemically bound. There's no chemical bond. So in the stomach with a high pH, they can migrate and affect our health. They can be carcinogenic or have endocrinological impacts. Another of the effects is that these agents, especially in the lungs, can cause lung cancer, just like asbestos did. These are synthetic fibers that remain in the alveoli of our lungs, and our body suffers oxidative stress, and that causes damage to our DNA, and it generates tumors. That is what is believed. This was said by the researcher Pauli back in 1998, before the whole microplastics craze began. But nothing has been studied about this since 1998. So we scientists also follow fads, and now microplastic is a fad, and we are researching it. But this was already said over 27 years ago by a researcher, Pauli. Looking now to the scientific literature, we find that microplastics, it's suspected that they are harmful. They can cause damage in human reproduction, in the digestive system and the respiratory system, and that they are related with colon cancer and lung cancer. And in March of this year, this presentation had been updated until the day before yesterday. But March of this year, some researchers have found microplastics in our brains, and micro samples, recent samples from patients, forensic samples, obviously, that have been analyzed, fragments of brain have been analyzed, and the more recent the samples were, the more microplastics they contained. The more recent the person had died, the more microplastics were found in their brain. And even 1 week later, this study was published. This was a bombshell. It was found in a study done with mice. It was found that those mice, they could follow the fluorescent microplastics through their brains with fluorescent cameras. It's a bit creepy, but they put cameras and followed these microplastics through the mice's brains, and it reached the bloodstream of the brain, the macrophages, the immune cells that we had that eat parasites and so forth, phagocyted the microplastics. And once those macrophages had eaten the microplastics, they withdraw them from the bloodstream and put them into the tissue to digest them and inform the immune system, hey, I found this microplastic. In that withdrawal process, since they had eaten so many microplastics from the bloodstream, those microplastics inside them are rigid, and they kept the macrophages from withdrawing, and that caused abnormalities in the blood flow and even small brain strokes. And more studies are needed, but it is believed that these microplastics can trigger strokes. These are animals, and the doses of microplastics were high, but it already indicates the potential danger of these microplastics. And with this, I conclude. I just want to give you some parting messages, some take-home messages. Microplastics are everywhere, and if you haven't found them, it's because no one has analyzed it yet. Because if you analyze any environmental matrix, any element, any organism on this planet, you're going to find microplastics. Even in glaciers, in the Alps, farthest away from population centers, microplastics can float through the air and be deposited on the snow. Microplastics are not pollutants. It's a mixture of pollutants, different sizes, shapes, different polymeric makeups, different additives inside the polymeric makeups. And that's what makes it so difficult for toxicologists to do their job, because there's a combination of at least 4 parameters. Microplastics are present, they're in the environment, and they will be there as much as comes out in the news about machines that can remove microplastics. We can remove the macro microplastics, but not the micro microplastics. And as time goes by, the microplastics will become nanoplastics, even smaller. The smaller the size, the more barriers there are that they can get through in the body and even go inside cells and cause other kinds of damages. So they're even more hazardous. Less is more. The smaller they are, the more dangerous they are. And legislation, and this is where I am bringing it home to you. Legislation is coming, but it's coming slowly. And we don't know how harmful they are. We're beginning to know how harmful they are, but we're not sure about the extent of the damages. Saying that in bottled water there can only be 3 microplastic, is that a lot or not very many? I don't know. I don't know if it's a lot or not many. There should be 0. But if there has to be 0 microplastics in water, no water in the world would pass that criteria. Even the purest spring in the Alps or the Himalayas would not meet that criteria. Glitter has been prohibited. Here in the room, one of my colleagues, how much glitter did you find in your samples? And you've done, we haven't found any glitter in the samples, but it's prohibited now. Okay. So advancements are being made in legislation, but they're very slow. And they're slow because we still don't know the potential danger, the potential harm of all the microplastics that are out there. Here, I want to express my appreciation. I'm speaking today. We can't all come and speak here, but it's a team effort, a small team, but we're very active with what resources we have. And aside from that, I want to express my appreciation to all of you for your attention. And we're here to answer any questions that we can. Thank you very much for your attention.
Molt bé, Joaquim, moltes gràcies. Ha quedat molt clar tots els efectes. Sobre els ecosistemes,
Thank
també
you.
ve ser el
Thank you.
mateix, no? Una
It's
mica.
very clear.
Sí, m'he
And
centrat
what about
potser en humans,
ecosystem?
perquè
Yeah, I've
ens toca
talked more
més.
about
Toca més, això.
Perquè
humans
si,
because
perquè si la pobra
closer
tortugueta se
to home.
li...
I
No?
know that
Té
it's
l'estómac ple de
turtles
microplàstics
or
o la seva
things,
salut
right? They might
es veu
have all the
ressentida.
stomachs
Dic la
full
pobra
of
tortugueta, no? Com
microplastics.
a una mica...
This little
sense cap mena
poor
de to
turtle,
despectiu, no? Però ja
I
m'enteneu.
don't want to
Si ens
be,
toquen antros, potser fem més
it's
cas. Fins que no ens
humans.
toquen antros, no?
It is something
Però els
always,
ecosistemes
we're
igual, al
always more
final
attentive
som
when
sistemes
we are
biològics. Llavors,
taking
qualsevol
the bad aspects.
microplàstic,
But it is true.
plàstic ens pot
My
afectar.
presentation.
Òbviament, en funció de la mida de
And
l'organisme,
in
pot
terms
interactuar o no amb
of
diferents
our
mides de
human
plàstic.
bodies,
No? Per exemple, la tortuga marina se menja les típiques
for instance,
anelles de les begudes
turtles,
en llauna, o se mengen els
they eat
pals
the rings of water,
dels bastonets de
and
les orelles, no? Que
they
se'ls queda
also
atrapat.
sometimes they eat
Organismes més
off
petits
the
que també els
eating and
afecta.
they get stuck.
Òbviament un pal o un macroplàstic no se'l menjaran, però sí
Same
que aquests
with
microplàstics,
another
no? Hem trobat, per
microplastic that
exemple,
can be
que larves d'eriçó de
sometimes
mar s'omplen el seu estómac, no?
we find
Són organismes
hedgehog
que
that
van,
have
van, van
in
nedant
their stomach,
i no seleccionen.
in their
Tal com
organism,
neden van filtrant,
can't do the
tota l'aigua.
filtering
S'omplen
all the things that
la
they eat.
panxa
So
de
they
microplàstics
have the stomachs
i
full of
clar, i el microplàstic no
microplastics.
alimenta. I això que fa és que no tinguin energia suficient per transformar-se de larves a eriçó de mar, no? I es queden en
That's
estat
why
larvari i al final
there's not
morin. Per tant, tenim una
there's not
població
the
reduïda
same.
d'eriçons de
Per
mar.
tant, pot contribuir també a la pèrdua de biodiversitat, al final, eh? És
Exacte.
una causa
Sí,
més de pèrdua de
una...
diversitat. Molt bé, no sé si algú del públic vol fer
Okay,
alguna
is there any
pregunta o
question
una
from the
qüestió?
audience or
Sí,
remarks?
Christoph.
Yes, Christoph.
I després... espera, que et donem el micròfon.
Let me pass the microphone out
I així et senten...
to facilitate the
t'escolten des
translation
de... Sí, no passa
and
res.
the remote connection.
Estan bé de tots.
Bon dia, moltes gràcies per la presentació.
Hello, and
Joaquim.
thank you for that presentation, Joaquim.
Potser la meva... Hi ha dues preguntes,
I
potser
have
és una mica naïva.
two questions, maybe a bit
Bueno,
naive,
una
but
cosa és que nosaltres fem part, no, d'aquest
we
ecosistema. També,
form
no?
part of
Igual
this
que la
ecosystem,
tortuga, que
don't
si la
we?
tortuga
Just
va
like
mal,
the
nosaltres
turtles in the sea.
anem
We
malament.
that is, if the turtle is suffering, so are we. Just two things.
Per què és tan lent
Why is
la legislació, no?
the legislation coming so slowly to legislate all this? I can imagine the answer, but that's number one. And number two, why don't we pay more attention to the principle of precaution in this area?
Sobre això no tinc
I
respostes.
don't have the answer to those questions.
Per què va tan lenta la
Why is
legislació?
legislation so slow
A dia d'avui, per ficar
as of today
límits
when it comes to setting limits
contingut de microplàstics en aigua?
on microplastic content in
El
water?
legislador diu, vale, quins efectes té aquests
Legislators have said, what are the effects of these
Si no
microplastics?
tenim els efectes i
If we don't know the effects,
encara no els tenim.
and we still don't know them,
Tot això va començar el 2000, la
this all
investigació
this research,
sèria
serious research
massiva amb
or
microplàstics.
massive
Tot just va
research
començar el
began
2016,
in
2015.
2017,
Primer vam començar amb el
2015,
medi marí, que és on allà hi havia
first
els
beginning
majors
with the
impactes,
marine environment
i
where
ens
the
hem
biggest
hem
impacts were
començat
being
els
seen.
estudis
And now
toxicològics de fer la
we're
Unió
seeing
de la Unió Europea,
toxicological
ara està
studies.
finançant
The European Union is now
un acord
financing,
per
they have
estudiar
opened a call
l'efecte
for
tòxic d'aquests
papers
microplàstics.
to study the toxic effects of these microplastics, but there won't be results until 4 years have passed. The ideal thing would be to apply the principle of precaution, but the principle of precaution has never been applied. It's never been applied because before studying microplastics, I was studying environmental contaminants, pollutants, flame retardants with bromide were replaced because they were dangerous, and they were replaced with organophosphorates, which are as dangerous, if not more so, than bromated. And Now they've been replaced with other ones that have effects, and I'm sure others will come that also have negative effects. So we don't learn, or we do learn, but we just prioritize the economy or the interests of the industry. So from a toxicologist standpoint, it is exasperating because you know that bisphenol A is now being prohibited from baby bottles and so forth, but they're replacing it with structural analogs molecules that have the same structure. Structural analogs, you had the same chemical structure. You don't have to be a toxicologist, but if I replace this molecule with another one where I just change a carbonyl or a small bond, it's going to have the same effects. And the truth is, we've already studied this. The analogs have more hypogenic capacity to accumulate fat inside cells, so therefore they have more endocrinological disruptive capacity. So we're eliminating one chemical, replacing it with another. That's worse. But here, legislation comes in. It's not the same thing. It's a different one. But you should apply the principle of precaution. If both of these molecules are similar, their effect is going to be similar. Let's not apply this out of precaution. They don't do it. And that's just two examples. Of the few cases that I know in which legislation has had an effect, for example, chemicals that don't have any industrial application, dioxins, for example, there will be legislation, a directive covering incineration. It is working, and the level of dioxins have gone down. Now, in general, dioxins in Europe are not an issue as they were at one time because dioxins don't have any economic interest behind them. When there are economic interests, the principle of precaution gets thrown out the window. I am not a jurist, nor am I a legal expert, but I see a repetition of patterns, and the principle of precaution may have been applied at some time, but I don't think it ever has been, or it's just not applied in general. It's true that the principle of precaution should be applied because it forms part of the principles that should govern in the European Union. The principle of precaution, caution, but who will have the courage to face certain people? And for a time, the principle of precaution took on a lot of strength, but it has been diluted, and measures can be taken when there is uncertainty. And since there are not determinate results showing a real risk of if you do X, you will have damage Y. They say we don't know the damages, we have to wait, but if you apply the principle of precaution, you shouldn't have to wait because you're already taking steps to avoid this. And until it is shown, until I can confirm or accredit that this is not dangerous, I won't use it. They don't do it that way. This principle has been losing strength in a field where it had been applied a lot, electromagnetic pollution, for example, but also it has been diluted because of the interests of telecommunications companies. But if they wanted to, they could apply it in a stricter way. That is true.
A nivell econòmic, vull dir que és més
Another thing, we think about the financial level or
del meu punt de vista, aplicar aquest principi de precaució que
could
intentar
be
reparar
applied as well.
o solucionar els problemes
Trying to repair
que han
or
aparegut
solve
sense
all the
aquest
issues
principi de
that we've
precaució,
had
és a dir, que
before
primer estudiar
without using this
correctament
principle.
el que pot passar amb això i si
Would
no
it
passa
be
res, doncs
something
ok,
that
ho posem en marxa,
consider,
però si
and
passa alguna cosa després
if something happens,
tenim un problema greu
if
econòmic
something
de
happens, we
reparar
have a
coses
serious
que
problem.
el sistema econòmic
We will have serious
portem.
problem. And yeah, but it's also true that when has happened.
També.
It's
No,
very
hi
late.
ha una petita
And
diferència, que
it's
el
very
microplàstic és
difficult
un
to find.
contaminant no afegit a cap mena de producte. Bueno, el producte és el de plàstic, la nostra roba, no? Que s'ha
Yeah.
d'actuar en origen. S'ha d'actuar reduint-los. I un altre clar exemple ara que m'ha vingut al cap és el glifosat.
Another clear example that has come to mind is glyphosate, because the principle of precaution is not being applied to glyphosate. It's actually the opposite. It has been approved following the whole thing of that they've taken the studies directly from the multinational corporations that study the effects of glyphosate. It is truly perverse. That is the industry of the mobile phones is massive. When you talk about petrochemical industries, plastic industries, it's amazing. Okay, we have another question, and if not, we can move on. I will be quick. Very grateful for this presentation. I really like hearing the viewpoint of people from science, as it helps us to understand the phenomenon of plastics and so forth. And a lot of times I get lost and get confused, and it's hard for me to understand it. So if I hear someone like you explaining it in this simple and very comprehensive way, it's truly a pleasure. But having said that, clearly the legislation is coming slowly, and there may be compensation of the damage that's been done, but only partially. Technically, what are the future solutions that are being put forth to solve such a pervasive problem? The pervasiveness, the ubiquity of microplastics and nanoplastics. Is there, I don't mean to say an applicable solution, but looking to the future, are there solutions to eliminate or reduce them significantly? Yeah, I could tell you about filters and washing machines to retain these fibers. I could talk about lots of things. And this may sound a little radical, but the best thing that we could do as a society is to go out onto the street and go to the yellow container and burn it. Burn all the yellow recycling bins. The only solution to solve the microplastics problem, in my view, is to reduce, and reduce again, and reduce again 5 times. Reduce. That's it. And that's it. Let me finish. When I was little, I used to play soccer, football, with a cotton shirt, and nothing bad ever happened to me. Okay, maybe it weighed more, maybe it fell apart, maybe it was a little more uncomfortable, but that's it. But now you see kids on the street, and they all wear so-called technical clothing, polyester stuff, as if they were elite professional football players. Do they really need it? No. Should we? Obviously, it would be unthinkable to have a plastic bottle for every speaker. No. This is tap water in a reusable bottle. I drink it, and that's it. Here, in the old days, we would have had 8 plastic bottles every day. I've been to scientific congresses 4 days talking about microplastics, where on the lunch, you got a plastic plate, a plastic cup, threw it all away. Haven't we been talking about microplastics for 4 days? How about if we don't have a Congress, and that way we don't generate all this trash? Okay. legislation that would be easy to apply. When I was little, I used to go out here to the Tarragona to Reus highway, and there was a Prica supermarket, a Carrefour supermarket. It used to be called Prica, now it's called Carrefour. Okay. And we went to go grocery shopping for the whole week on Saturday with my parents, and you go to the cash register, and the cash register, 40 different plastic bags to put all the food in. My mom would take extra ones to use for whatever. But since they've been charging 5 cents, people bring their own bags, and they are plastic bags, but they last longer. They bring plastic bags from home. Legislation, that is, every bag costs 5 cents. The consumption of bags has been stratospherically reduced. And it's very simple. It's a matter of political awareness and society awareness. Society influences politics to pass laws that, okay, yeah, we prohibited glitter, great. But prohibiting bags, prohibiting in congresses and conferences, in restaurants, it's been done, although it's not being applied much in Spain. Serve tap water, no bottled water. If there is a congress in a university or someplace like that, tap water, reusable water, and you will reduce the consumption of plastic stratospherically. And I'm not a jurist. I have only limited knowledge. I don't know anything about circular economy, but there are little steps that you can take like that to reduce or dress your kids in cotton when they have to go play soccer or football. It doesn't matter if they get dirty or the shirt weighs too much. They grow up and you get rid of it. You have to reduce. The only solution, because we've been talking about wastewater treatment plants, including some microorganisms that eat plastic, it takes at least 6 days. The water spends 1 day at the wastewater treatment plant. You can't spend 6 days there. You would need some massive retaining ponds to do that. The only real solution and quick and effective solution as of today is to reduce in every area, textile, packaging, any area, any of these fields, you can reduce. You yourself at home, us, and putting some pressure on the politicians, but the way the world is working nowadays, the way things are going, I don't know if we can put much trust in politicians, but that's a different topic. And so if I don't want to get into legislation, even less so politics, but burn the yellow recycling bin, because we shouldn't be recycling because we shouldn't be generating. I go to a lot of schools and I ask them, what should we do with plastic? They raise their hand. Recycle them. Recycle plastic. Okay, great. At least they think we have to recycle. But in the 3 R's, there's 2 other ones. Reduce and reuse. Recycle is the last one. But all they think is recycle. They have been bombarded with the message of recycling so much that all they can think of is recycling. Yeah, recycling is great, but what about reducing? I would say the 5 R's, and each one of them is reduce, because it's the only way. What can't be reduced, we'll try to recycle it or reuse it, but reduce, don't give them the option for the other 2. Okay, Joaquin, I don't want to go on and on. I'll never finish, but there you go. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker who will be joining us online.
M'escolteu bé?
Okay, here you are, if you can hear me. I don't see you yet, but I soon will, I suppose.
Ara potser.
The technician can see you.
No?
We can see William Oysen.
Sí? Vale.
Now we can? Okay, now we can see you.
Bé, et vaig presentant, disculpa perquè s'ha allargat una mica el debat, però espero que que estiguis, que puguis entendre'ns
And
perfectament.
imagine
Molt
you
bé.
can hear us well.
Hopefully,
saludem
you can hear us well.
Dehan,
Hi,
que és
Liam.
investigador
Hello
i
to
postdoctoral
Hi, William.
del grup de recerca concedit en
He's a
geociències
postdoc
marines
researcher
de la
Han,
Universitat
on
de
marine
Barcelona
science
i
a
ens
researcher
parlarà també des
at
del
the
punt de
University
vista
of
més
Barcelona,
científic experimental, no, de
from
les
and
the
he will give
Geosciences,
us
Marine
secretària
the
Geosciences
science
Research
point of
Group.
view
We talk about
on
microplastics on the
microplastics with the focus
Catalan
on the
coast.
Catalan
Thank you
coastline.
for being with
Thank
us and
you.
participating
Sí,
with us
moltes
here in
gràcies,
this
Aitana.
Congress.
Primer de tot, estic molt agraït a
Thank
estar
you.
aquí.
Thank you. First
Estic
of
una
all,
mica... No estic
thank you for having
ni a
me.
l'oficina ni a casa, així que espero que la connexió
I'm
vagi
not,
bé i
I'm,
fluida, i si no...
I'm not at the office, so I hope that my connection
alguna cosa.
is good enough.
Llavors vaig a compartir la pantalla.
So I'm going to share my screen and
A veure...
Perfecte, ho veiem,
Ho veieu bé, eh?
brilliant.
Sí, molt bé.
Yes, we can see it well.
També,
Yeah,
sí, sí.
Molt bé,
yes.
gràcies. Vale, bueno, molt interessant, Joaquim, la presentació que has fet ara, per cert.
Thank you,
parlaré
Joaquim.
ara
I
mateix
loved your presentation.
un
I
cas
want
més
to
concret,
talk
més
about
proper,
something
però també
very
dedicat més
specific.
als plàstics que trobem flotants, no?
And I'll be talking about the floating plastics that we see in our ocean here in the coastline. I will explain which type of plastics do we have, and we'll try to see where they come from. I'm a postdoc researcher, and I work in marine science. I have a long experience on investigating, on researching different types of toxics. In the last 10 years, I've been focusing on the anthropogenic impacts on our seas. And there's another thing that we do in my research unit, which has to do with paleoceanography and paleoclimatology. We're a very small group. You can see it here. This is us. Small group of people, and we work at the lab. And we also have collaborations with another universities. As I said, we have a 10-year-long experience on plastic, especially those floating in our seas. But not only, we also look at the rivers. And we have developed different methodologies as well to analyze the plastics and microplastics. First of all, I wanted to start with this map. It is a bit old, it has 10 years. And in this map, we can see the results of one of the first global studies on plastic concentrations. That's from 2014. It's a team of the University of Cádiz was able to analyze and to have an overview of all the plastic concentrations around the globe. We see that there are 5 big areas in which the concentration is really high, especially in the Pacific. In 2015, there was also another study based on the Mediterranean Sea, and you can see the red points are the highest concentrations of plastics in the Mediterranean. What we could see back then is that around the year between the year 2010 and 2015, we could see that the plastics incoming to the sea were higher in its number than the ones that they're floating around. But it was very difficult to see where this was being accumulated. In the year 2019, there were other studies, and we could see that 50% of the plastics incoming to our seas, 50% of them, they were offshore, and the other just arrived to the coastline.
Sobre aquesta època, 2021, es va fer un estudi que veieu
in 2021,
que simula, diguem,
we can see here on the right-hand side,
un cop entren de terra a mar. Llavors vam veure
we can see what's the concentration
de tots aquests plàstics es quedaven acumulats en aquestes zones costaneres.
we could see how the concentrations were in these coastlines. So we were transitioning from this idea of the big regions in which a lot of plastic was being accumulated. So there was a transition. Before, these plastics were more offshore, and they were coming closer to the coastline. And that's a trend. But that's just a model. And now we've realized that we don't have a lot of data of the coastline concentrations. And why is that? Because the big vessels who carry out these studies are not allowed to come as close to the shore. And so we don't have the capacity to collect data, or not the same capacity as we have when they are offshore. So you can see here a picture of a woman, of a lady. She's Elsa Camins, and she designed a special type of net that can be dragged with no engine boats, such as a kayak or hobbycat or this type of small boat. That was really a big change in our studies, because then we were able to collect data. We used these nets, we made several of them, and we distributed all over the Catalan coast. You can see here the points in which we have those nets, and we see that we have expanded our activities. Now also we are reaching the Cantabrian. And 2 years ago, we published an article in which we were able to give the first numbers of the plastic concentrations close to the coastline. So that was thanks to, as I said, these special nets that we designed, and we distributed along all of these associations that you see here on this slide. And every 2 weeks, we were there and took a sample. And also, we decided to involve also the population, the public. This is something it was presented as an activity, and in this way, everyone was involved in a scientific project. It's a way as well of raising awareness, and it is a project that had this twofold approach. It's a science, and as well it can raise awareness and involves a lot of people in the taking of samples. Once we had our samples taken, those plastics came back to our lab. We have them in the lab, and this is where, with a very sophisticated process, we were able to analyze those plastics. We gave a name and surname to every plastic. We identified the color. We also were able to establish whether it was a fragment, a filament, pellets form, and we also were able to identify its shape, size, and at the same time, that's probably the most important part, we were able to identify the polymer, and that's really important because that's the origin of it.
Llavors, passo ja directament a una mica explicar-vos uns quants resultats que tenim.
I'm going to explain you some of the things we found in the Catalan coastline, the floating plastics that we found. Most of them are fragments, we don't really know where they come from. They are very small, they are irregular in its shape, we don't know where they come from. We also found films or sheets, which normally are byproducts or they come from plastic bottles, plastic bags. We also found foams, and that comes mostly from the food industry, pellets, artificial turf, spherules that now we know that they are banned in the cosmetic industry, and others. In terms of colors, most of them are translucid, and that really kind of confirms that most of the plastics that we can find in our seas come from one single-use plastics. Polyethylene and polypropylene, it's the material they are made of in its majority, and yeah, that's what we found. So here you can see how we have been able to create some graphics in which we see the concentrations. We can also have the weight of them. And we have the whole coast, the whole Catalan coast sampled and analyzed. You can see that if we look at the Catalan coast, there are certain sites in which the concentration of plastic is not very high, the ones in the north. And however, if we go to the south of Catalonia, you'll see that the concentration is much higher. In the right-hand side, we see a picture of the San Sebastian beach in Barcelona, which we found the maximum amount of concentration. Those images come from a 2015 study. We have 1 million of items per square kilometer. Those are astonishing numbers that give us an idea of the high concentration of plastics. Much more than that, much more than the ones that we can find in the middle of the sea. Like if you can see, so the red line that you see in the graphic is the one that establishes this 1 million of items per square kilometer. If we were to review all the articles on plastic concentration, and here we put into this list of studies a lot of assessments that have used more or less the same methodology that we used, we can see that the highest concentrations of the study go over 40 items per square meter, which is the same as 40 million of items per square kilometer. So Barcelona undoubtedly has one of the highest concentrations of floating plastics. If you would like to go deeper into that topic, we do have a website which is very interactive, and there you will be able to see more in detail all of the numbers and concentrations. So you can use the link that you have now here, and that will give you a good idea of the concentrations and all the samples that we took. And as a consequence of this study, we've seen that there's a lot of plastic turfs in this kind of fake grass or fake turf. And what we saw with this study that we did together with the University of Cádiz in 2023, 2 years ago, we were able to analyze all of these plastic turfs, and these had very high reach. This study became very well known And we were able to quantify the plastics and microplastics in this kind of artificial turfs. It was very impactful, this study, but I think because there was a demand in our society to know, see these things everywhere now, these artificial turfs. You can see that this kind of surface is prone to break. We see that here, we see a shoe in the picture on the right-hand side. That's what happens to your shoes after playing over 1 hour on the surface. All of the different elements get stuck in your shoes. And the same when it rains. So what we did in our article and in our study is that of all the samples that we took, you can see the Catalan coast, but we also included a river in Andalusia, the Guadalquivir River, and we saw that elements or fragments of artificial turf was present in over 50% of our samples, especially in the Barcelona area, where the average was 15% of the total plastics. Sometimes the fragments are so small that you're not able to really establish where they come from, but so this average of 15% of the total plastics coming from this kind of turfs is quite astonishing. And then if we go to see the concentration in RCs, this is of 100,000 items per square meter. We find more of those in the sea than in the rivers. Most of them are from polyethylene, and this is, the main component in those type of surface. So when we think about artificial turf, we see that it doesn't, its impact is not only on the oceans or on the rivers, but also has other consequences. This kind of turf makes the urban temperature go up by a good stretch of degrees. Temperature can even reach 74 degrees. It does have an impact on urban diversity as well. You can see the difference in the type of birds and insects that are attracted to the artificial turf. And also it has an impact on water. We know how it's been sold as something that is better because you won't have to use much water. However, for every square meter, you will need over 600 liters of water. And it's not water that comes from the soil, it just comes from places such as China. And it is true that it's not easy to recycle this kind of turf. There's not a plant in Europe that can properly recycle these turfs. If we think about all the water that we need to make it, to manufacture this, is over 4,000, actually 4,500 liters of water for just 1 square meter of artificial surf. Also, during summer, you actually need to water this artificial surf, otherwise the temperature goes up too much, and that means that you will need water as well if you opt for one of these surfaces. At the same time, we know that there are a lot of VISUs and PFAs in the artificial turf, and this is a study that was carried out some years ago, and they exposed kids to these kind of surfaces. They were playing there, and they made a comparison between normal green and artificial turf, and you can see how they were exposed to PPOS much more when they are in playing in this kind of artificial turf. Even though we know about all of these problems, we see that artificial turfs are extensively used. I'm sure you know the music festival that you can see in the picture, and they define themselves as sustainable. But look at that. They are all covered on artificial turfs. You will find them as well in play areas for the kids, in the houses. Why? Why? This is an article of 1 week ago. We see here how some companies, some fake grass companies are suing scientists that they are talking about this, the dangers of artificial turf. So the lobby here, the lobbying tasks are very powerful, and they try to go against the scientists, and they are really out there. So that's the next step. In the last 2 years, we've also been participating in a project called Trace. We want to find out how these plastics end up in the sea. Most of them come from river streams, but there's also a part of them that come from the wastewaters of the city. And in Barcelona, when we have torrential rains, it means that all the effluents come together with the domestic waters, because that means that all treatment plants in those cases are oversubscribed, and they have to operate in a different matter, and they do spillage of water on the rivers directly when they have these torrential rains in cities such as Barcelona. So we wanted to see exactly what was the entrance point of those plastics. You can see here how we have the data from the Llobregat River in Barcelona and the Besòs River in Barcelona, and we took samples for a full year, and we could see all of it. We could get samples, and you can see here that every year over 40,000 million of plastics, which is the same as over 7 tons, are being spilled in the coastline of Barcelona through rivers, and that's something that is overwhelming, really, when you look at these numbers. And as I said, when we have rain episodes, this goes over 1.2 thousand million, so that's a high raise, and we can find many things as well here, cigarette butts and other types of plastics that come with these inputs of water. And then what happens? This ends up being spilled in the sea. As you can see, the picture there is where the Llobregat River ends, and that's a sample that we were able to take here, and in less than 2 minutes, we were able to collect these numbers. That was in less than 2 minutes. It is impossible for our lab to identify every plastic. So some of these samples were dismissed because it was just too much, too overwhelming. Towels, as you know, wet towels, this is a problem as well. And we saw that 10 million of wipes of these wet towels were being dumped in our rivers and seas. So that's an issue. And we're talking about 1 million per year of wipes, and that's a real problem, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. Those pictures were taken in Blanes, in the north of Catalonia, and you can clearly see that the majority of plastics here are wipes. They have a high density, so sometimes you won't see them on the surface of the sea. They stay at the bottom. And there is an average of 15 kilos per square meter of wipes in Barcelona, in the Barcelona coastline. So that's huge. It's huge. It's not just in terms of it's not only in terms of the environment, it's also in terms of money. It is very, very costly to also try to take these wet towels out of our seas. Actually, at a national level, the cost amounts to 200 million euros per year, which is really a very high number. And today, well, it's not, we started some months ago to work on a royal decree in Spain that tries to regulate wet towels. And today is the deadline. Today actually marks the deadline to try to change or modify this proposal of royal decree in Spain. This project trace not only looks at the number of plastics, but as I said, we want to know where they come from. We want to be able to create a model that predicts and tells us where these plastics come from, the ones that we see in our rivers and in our coastlines. And so after all the samples that we took and the work done, we are starting to create models that gives us an idea of where these plastics come. You can see how the plastic moves. This matches the message that I was saying at the beginning, like everything that comes from the coast stays close to the coast, doesn't go very far. You see how the currents take it to the south sometimes, but most of the plastic stays really close to the coast. In Barcelona, yes, we generate a lot of plastic, but we also receive a lot of plastic. We have this current that you can see here, and that means that we also get the plastic coming from other regions as well. And we can see how most of them come from France and some of them from Algeria. There's another current coming from the south to Barcelona. So 2 years ago, we started with this program Trace, and it is ongoing. But now we have another one, a new project called TRAP, which tries to integrate plastic information, not only the ones in Barcelona, but also we want to integrate the different regions of Catalonia. Tarragona, most probably, will be a part of this study as well. So this is all from me, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Molt bé, moltes gràcies. No anem gairebé de temps, però si algú té
Thank you. We are a bit behind schedule, but if someone has a question or a comment, please go ahead. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, the interpreters, because there was a bit of background noise. Apologies for that, but thank you so much. So now we have a break. We will go to the bar here, and don't worry, it's all on us. And we will try to restart at 11:10, if that's okay. We would start the next panel, okay? Which is about legal trafficking of waste. Thank you.
Ai, vale, perdó. Ah, no t'ha fet foto? Bueno, nosaltres hem fet, si no, eh? Sí, crec que sí. Però bueno, vale. Aquí dissimulando.
Va, doncs si us sembla, a tots i a totes, podem començar amb l'últim panel d'aquest matí i d'aquest congrés. Que la veritat és que jo havia pensat, en el moment d'introduir aquest panel, diré, bueno, comença el tema del sistema penal, el tràfic il·legal de residus,
at this Congress. We're
i
talking about the
normalment els
criminal
congressos també
system
situem sempre el
around
cantó fosc de
plastic
les coses.
waste trafficking.
Però la veritat és que
Criminal
després de
lawyers
les
always talk about
dues
the dark side of
ponències
things,
d'aquest
but
matí, el
after
cantó
hearing
fosc
the
no és ni tan sols el dret
first
penal,
two
sinó que és
presentations this morning,
la ciència.
the dark side is not
I per tant,
criminal law, it's what we hear
jo no
from
puc dir
science.
realment que jo
And
estigui
so I
redactant
can't
el
say
cantó fosc
that I'm
del
working on
problema,
the dark
sinó
side
que
of the
el cantó
problem.
fosc és estrictament
I
les
could
dades
say that the dark side
que a mi m'han semblat,
are
ja les coneixem,
these
perquè realment
data,
les coneixem, però són
which
molt alarmants
we
cada
already
vegada
knew,
que
but
des del sector
were
científic
very
algú
alarming.
explica
But it's
realment
even more
l'impacte
alarming
de
to
tot
hear someone from
i
the
en fi,
scientific field
què dir.
tell you
Dit això,
straightforwardly
m'agradaria
about
també començar amb
the
una
true
frase
impact of
que ahir
microplastics
el
and
professor Michel Prier en
this
la
whole
seva
crisis.
primera ponència,
Going
la
back to what
inaugural,
we
va
heard
comentar, ho
yesterday
va dir així
from
per sobre,
Professor
però
Michel
va dir
Pirer,
com més regulació,
he said the
més
more regulation,
criminalitat.
the
I
more
en parlaríem avui.
criminal activity.
I això és una cosa
And that
tots
is
que ens
true,
dediquem al sistema de justícia penal
as
sabem
we know,
perfectament, perquè
if
de
we
vegades
work
es veu
in
la
criminal law.
solució dels problemes en les
Sometimes you see
prohibicions, la
the solution
hiperregulació,
to the
i
problems
cada vegada que
in
tenim una prohibició
prohibitions and
s'obren un munt de
hyperregulation, but every
neguits.
time you
I
prohibit
per
something,
tant,
you create a new
realment
black
el dret
market.
penal
So
arriba
criminal
tard
law
sempre, arriba
is
malament,
probably
però també és
always late,
imprescindible i el sistema de
but it's
justícia
also
penal
essential.
ha de ser,
And the criminal law system
prevenció,
must
ha de ser
be
reacció
about prevention, it must be about
és un
reaction,
repte
and it is a
específic en
specific
aquells camps
challenge
com és el del
for
comerç
fields
de
such
residus,
as
on
waste
es
trade,
barreja el que és el comerç legal amb
where
el que és el
there is a
comerç il·legal.
combination
És a dir,
between
aquells
legal
sectors de
and
criminalitat
illegal
on
trade.
l'objecte del
And
tràfic és il·legal
the
a
objective,
totes llums, és a
the
dir, sempre
object that is
diguem que encara ho tenim més fàcil per
the
reaccionar, però quan resulta
illegal
que estem en un àmbit
traffic
on hi ha un
is
comerç
clearly
legal,
illegal.
lícit,
But when there is
la
legal
barrera amb
traffic,
el comerç il·legal de vegades
the
encara és més
borderline
difícil
between legal and
Per
illegal
això avui
is hard to determine. That's why today, in this final panel and within the context of this project, we want to take a new look at the problem and explain how this is not a criminal law or a criminology Congress, which is one of the virtues of this Congress and project is this diversity of perspectives to explain the dimension of the problem of illegal waste trade. To do so, we've designed this in a way to give us an impactful standpoint and multidisciplinary approach, and to talk with people who, beyond criminal law, it's not so much about an in-depth analysis of criminal law, but to have different guest speakers who can give us an idea of the magnitude of the problem and see where not just the facts, but the framework of action is, where are the main challenges to do so. We have in the first part of the session 2 people with us who I will now introduce, Nancy Isarin and Monica Pons Hernandez, and then we will watch the Unsustainable documentary and its director to give us a presentation. So we want to keep opening our eyes. This morning it's about opening our eyes and seeing the true dimension of this tragedy. Let's start with our first presentation. It will be from a person who has touched very closely all of the problems and repercussions of illegal waste trade. Nancy Isarin began her career as an environmental inspector in the Netherlands and formed part of a national task force that investigated major environmental crimes. She was doing that for 9 years. Since 2006, she has been an independent expert. She's based in Portugal now. In that role, she is advising a broad range of international organizations in environmental compliance, inspection, and legislation application strategies with a specific focus on waste. She is also a researcher and educator and trainer for all of the stakeholders in the environmental law chain. When I say application, I mean this term that it's often hard to translate law enforcement, how to enforce the law. It's hard to translate into Catalan or Spanish, but we all know what it means, law enforcement. So that is why Nancy will give us such an excellent presentation on illegal waste trade at the international level. And then with Dr. Pons, we will bring it down to the Spanish state level. But now we will give the floor to Nancy Isarin, who will tell us about the Basel Condition, and we will hear about the international plastic waste trade. Nancy.
Having accepted our invitation, and you have the floor for 30 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present during this important conference. Hearing your feedback also from yesterday, unfortunately, I couldn't make it to attend yesterday, but it seems like some very valid and important discussions took place. And I'm hoping to add a new perspective to the discussion. So I will share my screen. And please, Maria, can you confirm you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I said I am an independent expert, and I have a background more on the practical side of things, so performing investigations and inspections. And for the last 20 years, I'm working together with international organizations that promote practical implementation and enforcement of international agreements related to mainly waste and chemicals management. And also the last couple of years, I've been doing research, mainly in the area of how corruption facilitates cases of waste and pollution crime. But today I will talk about the plastic waste trade, a bit on the legal side, but also how plastic waste is illegally traded at the European and global level. So for the next half hour, these will be the topics I will be talking about. First, setting the scenes with 3 cases. Some of the trends regarding plastic waste trade at the global level, and what are some of the factors that influence this trade. A bit on the legal framework, again at the global and EU level. What are the drivers behind the illegal trade in plastic waste? What are some of the modus operandi that we see, and what are some of the recommendations looking forward to try to tackle the illegal trade in waste or plastic waste in this case. And again, indeed, focusing on the investigation part is one of the tools from the broader toolbox, I would say, to promote a more sustainable plastic waste use, generation, production, and management. So, of course, we understand that performing investigations is not the answer to the problem, but it may help, of course. So first, I would like to highlight 3 cases. The first one concerns an investigation. The results were published in 2023, but this was an investigation carried out by the Spanish Civil Guard. Of course, Tarragona is taking the lead, but also together with Europol and other EU member states. And this concerned an investigation for the illegal export of 5,700 tons of plastic waste. The export took place from the EU to several non-OECD countries. However, the export of plastic waste was falsely declared as either plastic or as recyclable plastics. And other intentions that they have discovered during the investigation, that within Spain the waste would either be abandoned or set on fire. The investigation showed there was a criminal network behind this case, where they falsely declared the waste. They used wrong documentation, committed fraud, and all to, of course, avoid inspection and enforcement actions, and to make money. The second case is a more recent case. It was published by Europol in February 2025. This is a case where waste, it was a mixture of waste, hazardous waste, medical waste, but also contaminated plastic waste, was shipped from different countries in the EU, Italy, Slovenia, and Germany, to Croatia. And during this investigation, 13 persons were arrested, with 2 high-value targets, and 4 companies are still under investigation. And also, again, in this case, the plastic waste or the other types of waste were falsely declared as recyclable, and it was illegally stored, buried, and abandoned in different sites in Croatia. This operation generated 4 million euros in illicit profits for the network. And of course, there are huge risks for the environment and human health. And some of the offenses included, aside from the environmental crime, are tax fraud, forgery, and money laundering. Again, this also shows that there was a criminal organization behind this case, showing that these are not ad hoc or individual incidents, but there is a clear intent to organize operations to make money, and it's also transnational. So There is a clear link also to the UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. And then the third case that I would like to highlight, it's even a more recent case. Again, the results or an update was published in May this year. Again, led by the Spanish National Police, dismantling a transnational criminal organization, trafficking plastic waste from different countries in Europe, so mainly from France and Portugal. The waste was shipped to Spain, where it was stored in illegal landfills or illegal storage sites. And either it was the intention to abandon the waste there, and in other cases, the waste was further shipped to countries outside Europe, India, Turkey, Malaysia, Angola, Brazil, Morocco, and the United Arab Emirates. Also, this case involved the criminal organization. And what was used during the investigation were, for example, sampling, the mapping of the illegal sites using the EU Copernicus program, and also more from the financial investigation side, the assets from individuals that they gained during this operation. This case involved mainly agricultural plastic, which has a higher risk even because it's often contaminated with organic materials and also, for example, pesticides, making it even more difficult to recycle. Some aerial photographs from some of the sites. You can see that this is not properly stored, and it doesn't look like it's getting ready for recycling operations. This is another aerial photograph. Again, it doesn't appear that they're intending to do anything else with the waste. If you look closely to this photograph, you see areas where plastic bales already have been stored and abandoned for a longer time. You can see there's grass overgrowing it. So that gives the idea that this is already ongoing for quite some time, but you also see new arrivals more on the top of the photograph. And these photos were made by the use of drones. So there's also showing that police investigations are using new techniques to identify the amount of waste that is stored and where, of course, you can find these kind of illegal storage sites. Now I would like to show two short videos. What the consequences are of this kind of illegal sites. The first video, it doesn't have any sound, but it's just to give you an idea. And this was a fire at an illegal site in Croatia. I hope this. And this is a video from the same fire, but from a different angle. I will give my comments later, but again, same fire, different angle. And there is no sound in this video as well, and this is just for you to realize what the impacts can be of such illegal sites or wrongly storing the waste. Why am I showing this video? Of course, it's not only about the air pollution, but this is very closely located to citizens or people living nearby. So there is a clear impact on human health and or risk for human health impacts as well, aside from the air pollution and impacts on soil and waterways. So the illegal storage of plastic waste might seem harmless, but often we see the intent to set it on fire because there is no other way to get rid of the plastic waste, and the impacts can be enormous, as you can see. So going a bit, looking a bit to the statistics. A recent report by the OECD, published this year, issues the statement that the global trade in plastic waste and scrap has declined by 50% between 2014 and 2023. And the reasons that are given for this decline in the global plastic waste trade are the Chinese import ban. I'm not sure if this already was discussed yesterday or today, but in 2018, China issued a ban on the import of most solid waste, including plastic waste. And before 2018, of course, most of the exports of plastic waste were destined for China. But in 2018, this was completely banned. This was kind of a shockwave through the plastic waste trade community. And at first, companies weren't sure what to do with their plastic waste. So you saw an increase of storage sites, mainly in Europe. But after a while, they found new outlets, not in China, but in the but in the Asian region. So we saw a lot of plastic waste being exported to other countries like Malaysia and Thailand and Indonesia, for example. So they give this as one of the reasons why the global plastic waste trade declined. Then also stricter rules came in place for transboundary movement of plastic waste. First of all, the plastic waste amendments that have changed the rules of the Basel Convention, the international treaty dealing with transboundary movement of hazardous and other waste and their disposal. These stricter rules came into play in 2021. Before that, plastic waste was not, well, most plastic waste was not covered by the Basel Convention and could be, in principle, shipped freely between countries. Of course, the EU had some rules in place, but they were tightened after the plastic waste amendments entered into force, which meant that the transboundary movement of hazardous plastic waste, of course, is bound by prior informed consent, but also mixtures of plastic waste were added to Annex 2 of the Basel Convention under Code Y48, which also implies that in order to ship mixed plastic waste across borders, a prior informed consent was required. And there were stricter rules on plastic waste and their quality that does not require the prior informed consent. So it should be clean plastic waste, only certain types of polymers, and it should be clear that that plastic waste is intended for environmentally sound recycling. In those cases, it's on paper can be still shipped without prior informed consent. And the third reason that the OECD gave is that the intra-regional trade grew. So there was more trade between OECD countries, for example. Now, it's not my role to undermine the research done by the OECD, but there are some comments I would like to make on this research. And the main thing is that if you look to the classification of plastic waste in the trade sector, so using the customs codes that are needed to import or export materials, plastic waste research is mainly using the customs HS code 3915. And although that is the main category for plastic waste, there are many other codes that can also capture certain types of plastic waste, like rubber or tires. e-waste, synthetic textiles. These kind of materials fall under another HS codes, and they are not included in this kind of research. And of course, there is also a part of the illegal trade that we are not aware of. So those were my questions related to the to this OECD research. However, there is, according to them, a decline in the global plastic waste trade. Then I would like to show another graph. This is an update from an NGO, the Basel Action Network. They monthly publish research and statistical data based on UN Comtrade, focusing again on HS code 3915. And this is the annual overview from the 10 top exporting countries. So this is the global plastic waste export, so not the overall trade, which of course also includes import, but this is focusing on the export. And there we see a decrease after especially the China import ban of waste. But we can see that between 2021 and 2023, the exports have stabilized more or less. One comment I would like to make on this graph is that there are some countries mentioned, specific, like Germany or the UK or the Netherlands or France. What I would like to highlight here is that that doesn't mean that all the waste came from these countries, but these were the countries where the plastic waste has exported the EU. So they are the last point in the EU where the plastic waste was exported from. But in practice, it could mean that it came from other EU countries or neighboring countries. And for example, in the case of Netherlands, the port of Rotterdam would then have been the last port in the EU where the waste would exit. So that's how this is counted. But still, you see stabilization of the export market between 2021 and 2023. So what are some of the factors that influence the global trade in plastic waste? Of course, there's the production and the application and use of virgin plastics. Then there is the factor related to cost. So what are the market prices for recyclable plastics? They influence, of course, also the destination. Will it remain in Europe, or is it better to export to Turkey or to Asia countries? Capacity treatment of plastic waste. The EU is intending to increase capacity within the EU. But at the moment, there is not yet enough recycling capacity for plastic waste within the EU. So that also drives the exports of plastic waste. Available technology. Some types of plastic or polymers are easy to recycle and others are not. So research and development in terms of technology also influence the trade. The quality, of course, of the materials. Is it contaminated with other materials or not? Trade measures. We see also now as a response that certain non-OECD countries are implementing their own import ban, following the Chinese example. For example, Thailand also now has issued an import ban of plastic waste. So these kind of national changes in policies and legislation influence the global plastic waste trade. Environmental regulations, tighter rules under Basel Convention, trickling down to the OECD level and the EU regulations. And lastly, infrastructure and logistics. So looking to collection systems, but also trade routes, availability of sea containers, for example. All these factors have an influence on the global plastic waste trade. Then I would like to highlight one other OECD report. which states that plastic waste is projected to almost triple by 2060, with half of the plastic still being landfilled and less than a fifth recycled. So this is based on business as usual. So of course they are suggesting to change direction when it comes to the use of plastic and plastic waste management. But if it's business as usual, so ongoing the way we are now, the use of recycled plastic will only be limited up until 12%. Plastic leakage to the environment is projected to double to 44 million tons per year. And also the buildup of plastic in aquatic environments will more than triple. So what does that mean? It means that if we continue the way we do now, plastic waste generation will, first of all, increase, but also the risk for illegal trade and unsound management also there will increase. So plastic waste, in this case, will remain a global problem. And we would have to see what a possible treaty on plastic would mean in this case, and how it might change the trajectory of the global plastic waste trade. Zooming in a bit on the legal framework. So perhaps you are aware that at the global level, there is the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste and their disposal, one of the oldest multi-environmental lateral agreements. As said, plastic waste was in principle not covered by the scope of the Basel Convention, but since 2021, there are more rules and procedures in place to cover hazardous and mixtures of plastic waste. Then there is the OECD decision on the control of transboundary movement of waste destined for recovery operations. This is following the principles of the Basel Convention, but providing for a simplified control system for intra-OECD trade. They also have updated their provisions following the Basel Waste Plastic Amendments. And of course, relevant for us is the EU Waste Shipment Regulation. And zooming a bit further in on the situation in the EU when it comes to plastic waste. In 2021, we had, following the Basel Convention amendments, we in Europe have issued a delegated regulation on plastic waste shipments because we had to implement in the EU the Basel amendments. But a bit broader when it comes to waste shipments, the Commission or the EU adopted the new waste shipment regulation. Officially, it has entered into force, but most of the provisions will only apply from May 2026. And then we see that next year in May, export of all plastic wastes are subject to prior informed consent. So that means also the non-hazardous plastic waste. But a couple of months later, in November 2026, export of all plastic waste to non-OECD countries will be banned. And this will be an important date because if we are looking ahead and trying to identify upcoming risks, it would be good and wise for law enforcement authorities to understand what this ban will imply for the trade, and indeed if other risks might pop up as a result of this ban. And then 3 years later, in 2029, non-OECD countries that would like to continue to import EU plastic waste, they may file a request to be excluded from the export ban. This request has to be submitted to the EU. But they have to make sure and prove that they can deal with the European plastic waste, and that they have sufficient facilities, capacities, and the right technology in place to ensure an environmentally sound management of the plastic waste. So next year there will be some changes that will influence again the global trade in plastic waste. Very briefly in practice, so the prior informed consent means that shipments of plastic waste, in this case certain types of plastic waste, can only happen if all countries and involved authorities have given their approval. So that's country of export, of transit, and import. Export bans are in place. There's already an export ban in the EU of hazardous and mixed plastic waste, for example, to non-OECD countries. And following the changes of the new waste shipment regulation, more export bans will enter into force. Then under the Basel Convention, each party has the right to prohibit the import, export, or transit of all or specific types of waste. So this means that as we see, for example, now in Malaysia or Thailand, if they wish to prohibit the import of certain types of waste, they can. And that would then, even though maybe the export from the EU would not be prohibited, but if there's an import ban, we would, of course, have to respect that. And additionally, each party also has the right to classify additional waste as hazardous waste. Then when it comes to illegal traffic, the Basel Convention is the only multilateral environmental agreement that has defined illegal traffic and also asking the parties to criminalize that offense. Looking to other multilateral environmental agreements like Stockholm or the Rotterdam Convention or Minamata, we don't see similar provisions in place. So in that sense, the Basel Convention was quite ahead of its time. It also has identified the consequences of illegal traffic, which meaning that if the illegal export is the fault of the exporter, then the country where the exported was located should take the illegally shipped waste back. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight is that transboundary movements between Basel parties and non-Basel parties is generally not permitted unless they entered into a bilateral or multilateral agreement. And this is where the OECD decision comes from, because US is not a party to the Basel Convention. They would like to trade waste, so hence the OECD decision that sets up this system, at least for intra-OECD trade in waste and plastic waste. We also see that the US can use Canada as a loophole. So they ship waste to Canada, and then, from Canada it's going to other Basel parties. And we see that while waste and plastic waste is viewed as a resource resulting in global trade, increased policies and regulatory control on this waste has created conditions where waste trafficking is increasing and often operating alongside legitimate waste operators. I think this is also maybe something that came out from the discussion yesterday. So what amounts to illegal shipments of plastic waste? I'm using here a graph that is coming from the Environmental Investigation Agency, an NGO. They published a report evidencing illegalities in global plastic waste trade at the end of last year. And they submitted various freedom of information requests to EU regulators. And this is an overview from the responses from the UK and the Netherlands agencies and Dublin, just to get a better understanding of what amounts to the illegal shipment of plastic waste. And here they identified 6 cases. So no Annex 7 or contract in place. Annex 7 is a requirement under the EU waste shipment regulation, where it should be highlighted what kind of waste is shipped, between which parties, and how it will be managed. This is just to ensure that there is at least some traceability to see where waste has been exported to and how it has been dealt with. In those cases where there was no Annex 7 or no contract in place between the two parties, that would amount to an illegal shipment of waste, according to EU legislation. In some cases, and we see most cases in the Netherlands, it went to unlicensed facilities or recipients of the plastic waste. Third reason is the contamination levels. There can be some contamination in the plastic waste. For intra-EU trade, it's up to 6%, but export of plastic waste outside the EU, there is a contamination level of only 2%. Then there is the export ban. So there are just some destinations, especially non-OECD countries, where plastic waste cannot be shipped to, even not with a prior informed consent. Misdeclaration of the plastic waste, either as clean or as perhaps virgin materials. Or the last case where there is no prior informed consent procedure or no notification procedure followed. So what are some of the possible drivers and gaps looking to illegal trade in plastic waste? Overall, there's still a weak enforcement. Environmental controls are low, often still low on the political agenda. I have to say that there are some countries in Europe that have made some good steps, and I would say that Spain is one of them. But overall, there is still limited resources, both at the inspectorate level and the criminal investigative entities. Which leads to the second driver is that it's a low-risk crime, so the risk of getting caught is quite low, and the money to be made in these illegal activities is quite high. So those interact, of course, with each other. A third challenge is unclear legislation. There is always a discussion if something is a waste or not. And then the second discussion if it's hazardous waste or non-hazardous waste. So even well-willing companies might interpret certain provisions wrong, leading to, again, illegal shipments of waste. There's a lack of traceability and also transparency. And these are also two items that they try to tackle with the new waste shipment regulation. Another driver are market conditions. As said, if there is a low quality or higher level of contamination, lower prices, shipment costs, transport costs, these kind of market conditions also decide what will happen with the waste. There's the lack of treatment capacity. If there's limited treatment capacity, the cost might be higher. So that would also be a reason in order to avoid cost or to externalize costs, that companies or operators try to find innovative ways to avoid this kind of costs. And lastly, we see that the illegal trade in waste or plastic waste is also used as a front or in combination with other types of crime, such as money laundering, finance, and other types of financial crimes. Highlighting some examples of modus operandi. I've mentioned it also in the beginning, but we see misdeclaring the type of waste. So either something in practice is hazardous waste, but it's declared as non-hazardous waste, or even as secondary raw material or as virgin material. So this is a paper-related offense or modus operandi. What we also see concealment. So exporters would hide the lower quality plastic waste in the back of the container and then put a couple of bales of clean plastic in the front of the container. So in case there is a inspection and customs or environmental inspectors would open a container, at first view, it would look like clean plastic waste. And if they don't look any further in the back of the container, they will let it go. Falsified test reports. For example, in the case of this agricultural plastic, they might be tempted to adjust the test results from the lab. Misuse of HS customs codes. Of course, customs codes are used also for profiling and targeting. So if you know that the customs is focusing on 3915, you are tempted to use other types of HS customs codes to avoid this risk profiles. When it comes to the trade in generally in waste, there is a complex web of entities. You have many different actors in the chain, generators, transporters, brokers, waste dealers, customs declaration entities. So it's very difficult, therefore, also to find out who was responsible at which time in the chain, and it's very difficult, especially if they're in other jurisdictions, to carry out a proper investigation. Exploiting extended producer responsibility schemes and levies. This is something that we have seen in the UK, where if it was just declared as export of plastic waste for recovery, they would already receive or in return get their levies without proving that the waste was actually treated in an environmentally sound manner, according to the same standards as we uphold within the European Union. And we also have seen cases of corruption practices, mainly bribery. For example, of customs officers that received money to let go and to declare certain imports or export as clean. So this will be my last slide. Looking ahead, tackling the illegal trade in plastic waste. I would like to highlight 6 items. First of all, it's to better understand the risks, threats, and trends. Not only for police, but for all actors in the law enforcement chain. I would definitely also highlight the role of the inspectors, but also customs, border patrol, police, obviously. Not just to be only reactive, but to be able to act proactive. And if you know that there are changes in legislation coming up which might impact the trade, you would have to adjust your risk profiling on that. So it also means collecting better data, not only at the national level, but at least at the EU level, or ideally global level, but that's very hard. Europol issues their SOCTAs, so their strategic assessment reports of high-risk crimes, but this is only every couple of years, and it would be good to have a better up-to-date understanding of, in this case, waste-related risk, threats, and trends. This links with the second item, is to be aware of changes in legislation and their impact on the trade. This means also training and awareness raising among not only the regulated community, but under the regulators and the law enforcement agencies. They need to be aware of what the changes are. For example, at the beginning of this year, new rules also entered into force regarding the export of electronic waste. There were Basel Convention amendments to the when it comes to e-waste exports and imports. So again, this had an impact on EU legislation, and everyone should be aware that there are new rules in place for the export of this type of waste, which is also closely linked to plastic waste. We are advocating already for a long time to enhance interinstitutional cooperation. So again, environmental inspectorates, even at the local level, because they are the ones that can see in the field suspicious activities, link it with police, customs. So we try to promote and foster this interinstitutional collaboration, and of course cross-border cooperation. There are some networks in place. For the police, there is, of course, Europol. Olaf is now focusing more on tackling illegal trades in waste, more from an administrative investigation perspective. But still more could be done. The use of innovative and new technologies for detection and investigation. We see, for example, in the Netherlands, they're testing predictive modeling. So that's more proactive technology. But you could also think about indeed using Copernicus or satellite data to detect changes in landscapes, or to go back in time and see how certain things have evolved, or the fingerprinting of certain types of waste. So it's also something that could help to be more proactive when it comes to preventing illegal trade in waste or plastic waste. Clearer definitions and limits. Again, it should be clear what is hazardous and non-hazardous waste and what are the allowed level of contamination. And lastly, I would highlight that the different actors should be aware of links to other types of crimes. And with this, I mean that investigation should not only focus on environmental crime, but also see if there are links to organized crime or to financial crimes, for example, or tax evasion. And that in practice means a closer collaboration between environmental experts and, for example, financial investigation units. In my time as environmental inspector, I would focus on the environmental provisions, but I would not have any clue what bribery or corruption would look like. So I wouldn't know what to look for. And I think the other way around applies for financial investigators. They know how to detect cases of financial crime, but they would not know how to recognize offenses of environmental regulation. So this is also something that we try to promote in the future. And I think with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Si us sembla, perquè anem una mica tard de temps, potser seria
And
millor
if you deem
passar
it
a la
appropriate,
següent ponència i
as we are
després
running a
fem
bit
un
behind
petit torn
schedule, maybe we could just move on to our
si hi ha
next
algun comentari,
presentation and then
alguna pregunta
have
específica.
a bit of Q&A at the
Igual Aitana,
end.
com a jefa del
I'm looking at
de
Aitana,
l'edifici medieval.
as she is
Aleshores,
the boss.
si és
But
així, passaríem doncs a
if it's
la
okay with you,
ponència de la
we
doctora Mònica
will move on
benvinguda
to
a la casa.
Dr. Monica
La Mònica
Pons
és
Hernandez,
criminòloga,
very well known
és
here at the
investigadora
university,
postdoctoral en corrents a
criminologist,
la Universitat de
PhD
Bergen.
candidate at the
Es va
University of
graduar en
Bergen.
criminologia a la Universitat de Barcelona.
She studied
Després va fer un màster sobre
criminology at the
criminalitat
University of Barcelona
transnacional a la
and has a
Universitat de
master's
Glasgow
degree
i
in
va
transnational
defensar la tesi
criminality at the University
doctoral
of
aquí a la
Glasgow
Universitat Rovira i Virgili
and carried out further studies
amb un
here at
retret
Rovira and
de tràfic
Virgili
il·legal, si bé
in
en un àmbit
illegal
diferent que
traffic
seria de les
in a different
drogues.
area.
S'ha especialitzat en criminologia verda i
She
també
is
aquí és part del
specialized
projecte, és part del
in
projecte
green
JustCircular
crime
i a més segueix
and
vinculada a
is still
nosaltres com a investigadora associada
affiliated with us
CEDAT.
as an associate researcher of CEDAT.
Projecte, doncs,
We invited her to be here to talk about the project and to give her criminological outlook on
tràfic i delictes ambientals a l'estat espanyol.
the hidden business of plastic waste, traffic, and environmental crimes in Spain to further explore this very interesting topic.
Hola, doctora Maria Marquès i hola a totes i a tots.
Hello, Dr. Marquez, and to all of you. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm sorry not to be there in person, but it will be nice when I do get back to Tarragona to visit you all in person. Let me begin by sharing my screen. Can everyone see it?
Sí? Sí, perdona. Sí.
Vale, perfecte. Vale. Bé, doncs, com us ha dit la doctora Marquès,
as Dr. Marquez has said,
avui presentaré la meva
today
investigació sobre
I will present my research
està vinculada al projecte
on
JustCircular, en el que
plastic waste traffic, And you will see that there is quite a bit of overlap between my presentation with that of Nancy Isarin. So I will try to move quickly through some parts to not repeat topics and concepts that we've already seen and heard. The main difference between these presentations is that I will be discussing the business of waste traffic, the part that exclusively deals with Spain as a country of origin, transit, or destination. Just to give a bit of background, and I will move through this quickly. I wanted to begin by discussing the problems of waste. It's one of the most relevant problems we have in the environment, waste management. There is a study by Europol. Every 10 years, they identify the most relevant crimes, and there are only two that have to do with the environment. Traffic in exotic species or in native species and waste management. As Nancy Sardin has said, the waste traffic is a product of our economic system, not the circular economy that would promote the reuse of materials, but it is derived from this linear economic model that has to do with extracting resources from nature, producing goods, consuming them, and throwing away the waste. This linear model of economy means that you have an unlimited production of waste products together with the limited capacity of the government to manage them adds up to a big environmental problem. What we now face is the combination of a lack of capacity by countries to manage waste and a growing dependency on the plastic products that we have. According to the data from the European Commission, every year 33 million tons of plastic waste is generated just in Europe. The problem of all these plastic waste products that we are generating, these 33 million tons, is that only 9% are recycled, 12% are incinerated, and 79% end up either in the landfill or abandoned somewhere in the natural environment. The problem with this 9% that is recycled, which is a very low number, is that most of the plastic can only be recycled once, twice, or at the most 3 times. Every time that plastic gets recycled, it loses its properties of consistency and so forth, and it's more difficult to reuse it to make a new material. And this is true about today's current recycling capabilities. This means that recycling is not infinite. It's not a solution to the waste problem. It is a postponement, if you will, of the problem. What we're doing is to postpone this fact, the fact that all plastic will either end up being incinerated or in a landfill or dumped somewhere in a natural environment. The reason that I began this research, what motivated me, it's the role of the EU in waste traffic. It's a very significant one. And I will speak more about this later when I talk about the roots of plastic traffic. Plastic is generated in the rich countries of the global north and is sent to poorer countries of the global south. As Nancy Certain has said, the countries of the northern of the global north, European Union is the leader and exports 40% of the exports of this waste, according to the UN, followed by the United States and Japan. This is so, but I'd be careful with these figures because the United States is not in the Basel Convention. We don't know if we can trust their data. On the other side of the coin, outside the global north, the receiver countries, we have the global south. Traditionally, these are the countries that receive this waste. And what we find is that these are countries in Southeast Asia and Turkey that usually receive this waste. That said, and Nancy has also touched on this, what we see is that the traffic inside, intra-community traffic in the EU is rising. Given the importance of this, given the importance of waste traffic inside Europe, but also the importance of Europe as the origin of waste products. This is what has motivated me to study the role of Spain. What's happening in Spain in this whole issue of plastic waste traffic? So, my apology, a couple lines about what I will deal with in this presentation. I will discuss the environmental and animal health impacts of this. We can skip through this because I think we can all imagine what this is. Maria has also mentioned this at the beginning, the dimension of the tragedy of plastic waste. And I'll talk about the 4 lines of legislation, which I don't want to get into because, as Maria has said, I am not a jurist. I am a criminologist, so I don't want to go into detail on that. But I'm not qualified to. Also, the research method for my research, the outcomes that I have reached, talking about the stakeholders' roots and crimes. And last, I will give a conclusion on the current situation of plastic waste traffic in Spain. So, to begin with the environmental impact and the impact on animal health. The impact of plastic waste traffic in humans, non-humans, and the environment is devastating. For human health, what we find is that it leads to respiratory problems and also longer-term problems like cancer. In the environment, we've seen Nancy's videos with examples of how much smoke comes from the incineration of plastic waste. All of this smoke generates greenhouse effect gases, methane and carbon dioxide, furthering the entire global warming phenomenon. And not just that, but it also affects the ozone layer, and that favors even more this global warming. In any event, another of the issues at hand is that there's a persistent pollution of air, land, and water. This leads to the degradation of entire ecosystems and an impact on human and animal health. Here you see another image, the turtle. Everyone can easily imagine when we talk about plastic pollution, we are all too aware of marine environment pollution. This is something that happens on land in landfills, but plastics end up finding their way into the oceans. We've seen the example of how plastics reach the oceans through rivers or through pipes. All of the plastics that reach the sea are not just endangering the marine environment and furthering the climate change. David Attenborough has an excellent documentary about oceans. Plastics are causing there to be a layer of plastic in the oceans, and that is keeping plankton from capturing CO2 the same way because the process is being interrupted. And this is also contributing to climate change. In addition to that, to an increasing degree, and in this case, Aitana is an expert in the field of microplastics. They are present everywhere. They are present in all microorganisms inside the ocean and also in marine animals, and they are accumulating in the food chain and reaching humans. So in addition to being an exclusively environmental problem, it's also a public health problem and a food safety problem. So, in light of all of these problems that comes from waste traffic, this is where we came to the concern about controlling waste traffic. The first tool and most important tool that we had was the Basel Convention. We've already discussed this. It was approved in 1989, regulating the cross-border movement of hazardous waste and its elimination. And Nancy also discussed this. What we see is that the legal traffic is defined as cross-border movement of waste without notification of the country to which it is sent, without the consent of the country that is receiving it, with consent that is obtained through manipulation, that is a lack of transparency about what is being sent or how it is to be processed. And although this is all done, the disposal when it comes to getting rid of the waste, that is not done in accordance with the terms, like just dumping the load in the back lot of a building, for example. And the regulation that I will focus on is the national sword policy of China, because a high percentage of waste was being sent to China. It was being managed as a resource, but due to the amount of plastic that they were receiving and their incapacity to process the waste, in 2018, the Chinese government implemented the national sword policy, or an import ban. This import ban prohibited the import of 24 types of solid waste, among them 8 types of plastics. Among the 8 types of plastic that are now prohibited to import to China, we find the ones that we most use in the day-to-day, plastic bottles, water, shampoo, and so forth. As a result, and I will speak more about this later on, and when it comes to the traffic routes, it's called crime displacement. The crime has been displaced. It hasn't been eliminated. The problem hasn't been eliminated. Plastics and plastic waste, instead of being sent to China, are now being sent to Southeast Asia, the Asian countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and so forth. And the difference is that they don't have any infrastructure or any facilities to process or manage these waste products that they are receiving from the north. Now, as for my research methods, that is, how have I compiled information to discuss the problem of plastic waste traffic in Spain and the stakeholders and the crimes and the routes that are being used and so forth. What I have done is a descriptive research method. My intention was to provide a detailed description of the problem. I am not creating hypotheses nor designing problems, just a description of the magnitude of the problem, or the aspects to be borne in mind when it comes to understanding this crime. To compile the information, what I've done is a qualitative analysis of the content, looking at the Seprona database, that is the Nature Protection Service of the Guardia Civil, compiling data from 2017 to 2025. I was going to do 2015 to 2025, but I didn't find any case from 2015 or 2016 on plastic waste traffic. It may be because at that time you could still send plastic to China legally. Therefore, there was not this sort of traffic in Spain, or at least it wasn't prevalent enough. And in 2017 to 2025, I have compiled 17 cases of plastic waste traffic. Just to say that when I talk about plastic waste traffic, I'm not basing this only on plastic waste and plastic scraps, but also I've understood it in a broader sense to include medical materials, vehicle tires, electronic materials, products, and so forth. Because as I've said, the problem is pollution and human health and non-human health problems that this involves, and that it be classified as pure plastic or non-plastic. The plastic that these materials contain end up polluting and affecting the victims in the same way. The information that I have compiled was classified or organized, differentiating between the magnitude of the traffic, the type of waste that was involved, the players involved, their modus operandi of the associated crimes. We'll talk about associated crimes, and the routes, the traffic routes used to transport the waste outside Spain. As for the results that I'll tell you about now, it'll be based on these classifications that I am analyzing this information with. Beginning with the extent of the illegal trade. Here I have added this in a very provisional way because it's impossible to know the true scope of the problem. This problem is not exclusive to waste traffic. It is a problem for any environmental crime. It's very difficult to have exact data about the magnitude. What is the exact magnitude of the traffic? First, because as Maria said at the beginning, there is an intervention of legal and illegal players, but there's also little political interest. There's very few resources, technical and personal resources, to follow up on all these crimes. The police pressure or enforcement is devoted to drug trafficking and things like that, more than to waste traffic or animal traffic. The magnitude of the traffic is very difficult to calculate because it is a very high number of unknown cases. But looking at Soprono's database from 2020 to 2021 to 2025, here we see some ideas about the magnitude. 40,000 tons of urban waste, 20 trucks daily of urban waste, 5,700 tons of plastic waste, 300 tons of end-of-life motorcycles and moped parts, 5,000 tons of hazardous waste from electrical appliances, and so on. What you can see in this table of the operations of recent years, the magnitude of the traffic and what we know is very high. And the variety of products that are being trafficked are very diverse. It's not just electronic devices that have to be monitored. The enforcement should be spread over a wide variety of materials that can be trafficked. As for the actors or players involved, as we research waste traffic, and as Maria said, there's a clear interrelation between legal and illegal operators. And this isn't just true for waste traffic, it's also true for animal traffic. It is a tendency that you find in all illegal market crimes, be they in legal or illegal areas. But the Drug Enforcement Office of the UN, in its 2024 report, underscored two kinds of players involved in plastic waste traffic. One, individual business people who are responsible for lower level crimes. There's a lot of bureaucracy in this. It's very difficult. It can be very complex. So these could be small companies who it's normal and likely, although it is still illegal, that they commit lower level violations. But that doesn't mean that they are actively involved or actively looking for a chance to do this sort of traffic. But then we do have criminal organizations that follow a more structured pattern, and that's what facilitates their committing these crimes. And I will focus on them in my presentation. According to Interpol, in 2022, there were two kinds of crime structures related with waste traffic. One were the organized crime groups, which in a more mainstream way, understood in a conventional way of an organized crime group. We find these in Italy with the Italian mafia associated with waste management. And then we also have legitimate companies that carry out illegal activities, not low-level violations. And these are characterized by a more flexible structure and the existence of decentralized nodes. Interpol determined that in the case of plastic waste traffic, the most common are not these organized, centralized, hierarchical structures, but rather what they were more surprised about when they looked into waste trafficking, that these decentralized nodes or cells that allowed them to have more resources to get around law enforcement or take advantage of legal loopholes that may exist. Looking to the operations that have been carried out in Spain, There are both kinds of organization. The Engini operation with a more hierarchical structure with one boss, and in all the other 15 or 16, they followed a more destructured or flexible structure, to say it one way. And this shows that in Spain, it follows what Interpol found, that in general, they are legitimate companies that carry out illegal waste traffic. Now, as for the associated crimes or related crimes, illegal trade in plastic waste is not just an environmental crime. But I always like to do a bit of a disclaimer here. Although it is true, it seems that the fact that it is an environmental crime is not enough to take it seriously. And we should get rid of that idea. We should be aware of the convergence of crimes and understanding associated crimes with an environmental crime helps us to build crime prevention strategies that are more effective. If you look to the Spanish waste traffic problems, there are 3 relevant associated crimes. As we said, when it comes to the players, the most important component is they're belonging to groups of organized crime that are structured and organized. That's what allows them to send waste from one country to another. But we have other crimes, such as corruption, bribing officials to get licenses, false documents, blocking inspections. And I have false documents here in bold. In almost all of the cases, it was found that fake documents were used to facilitate waste traffic. So almost always behind these cases are fake documents, and that's not exclusive to waste traffic. It also happens in wild animal traffic. And also there are legal and illegal players. So money laundering, tax evasion is very common. These are the crimes that are most often concurring with waste trafficking. And to conclude with the outcomes, before I move on to the conclusions, and what I will try to link up with everything we've spoken about in this presentation, on this map, what you see is these routes go against the legal, illegal markets. Usually it goes from north to south. The particular thing about waste trafficking is that it goes from the global north to the global south. As we said, this is a tendency that is not necessarily changing. It's not that there's more traffic inside the EU, but there has been a change in these routes as a consequence of the legislation that has been approved and applied. What we find is that Spain is a country of origin and transit and, to an increasing degree, destination for waste trafficking. If you look at the operations of Seproma from 2020 to 2025, you will see a classification of the operations here with the situation of Spain as a country of origin, transit, or destination. And it will always be a country of destination because Spain is always considered a country of destination. It's the country, the case study is Spain. But if you look at the country of origin and destination, you see a trend that to a growing degree, Spain is a country of origin. So we're following this trend that the countries of the global north are generating these waste products that are being sent outside their borders. But if you look at the refuti, Pobel, or plastics case, to a growing degree, Spain is on the list of the destinations for these waste products that have been confiscated by Seprona, along with other law enforcement organizations. If you look at the destination column, you can see that the country of origin when those waste products reach Spain are neighboring countries of the EU, Italy, France, in Rifuti and Pobel, the two most recent operations of plastic trafficking in Spain. And to finish with this part of the presentation, I will move to two waste trafficking examples. One concept is waste colonialism. It's not something that I've made up. It has been in the academic literature for some time. It is defined as the practice of industrialized countries to export their waste, including hazardous materials, to poorer countries that don't have the necessary resources or infrastructure to manage them safely. This means that we are creating a lot of environmental damage and exploiting the receiving countries. And basically, this system that we are following is a continuation of colonialism. The plastic traffic routes are not just the result of capitalism. It's not just that it's cheaper to manage this waste elsewhere. It is an active consequence of colonial dynamics, of ecological imperialism, of the capitalistic consumption and means of production system. Countries, developing countries, are petitioning for the complete prohibition of waste trafficking, according to the Basic Convention, but countries like Spain want to keep the system running in a regulated way and be able to keep sending hazardous waste to the south. And as we see in the case of Spain, this growing role of intra-EU traffic, this is a good headline I got from a newspaper. Spain, Europe's landfill? I don't think it is, but it is an increasingly popular destination for European waste. And what we've seen in the data that we've compiled is that waste that is being trafficked inside the EU is increasingly coming to Spain. And people are committing these crimes to increase their economic benefits. According to Seprona, this is the reality or the reason this is happening, that Spain is the recipient of waste from other European countries. The cost of waste management is significantly lower in Spain. This is a key factor to understand why Spain is becoming a destination country. According to the Seprona authorities, the average cost of a ton of waste in urban waste is about 50 euros, while in France it's 250, and Italy it could be as much as 400 per ton. This means that, as we've seen in Rifuti and Pobel operations, companies send their waste, urban waste, to Spain to save these higher costs in their countries of origin. And the truth is, we can see a mimicking effect, not so much about colonialism, but the impact of this waste inside European Union is having more impact on the more marginalized areas, such as we see in the two operations, the areas of Spain that are receiving this waste have economic challenges like depopulation, abandoned rural areas, etc., such as the Tarragona province or Lleida province in the case of Catalonia, but also Zaragoza, Cuenca, and other areas like that. One of the most important things to conclude this with crime convergence, fake documents are used in both cases to send waste to Spain or from the north to the south, or fake documents to send waste inside Europe, be it in Spain, Czech Republic, etc. And fake documents are used differently. In the case of waste colonialism, here we see this motivation, this encouragement of circular economy. This waste is being sent to third countries, not as waste, but as secondhand products. And this is a tendency not so much of plastic waste, but this also has occurred with electronic devices.
In the case of Spain, what we see is that this forgery of documents is completely different, because what they say in the documents is that the waste arriving in Spain have been cleaned, have been treated, when it's actually not true. However, they use a network of several companies, so to make really difficult to trace if what they're saying is true or not. And that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer your questions now. I would like to share the article with you, my article, but still being revised. So I'll do it as soon as I can. Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica, for your contribution. It's descriptive, you can say it's descriptive, but it's also very enlightening, I have to say. It's not just a mere description. Before starting with a Q&A session, I'd like to add something, even though it comes from the legal world. You know that we'll see now a documentary that comes to complement what we've been hearing, both from Nancy and Monica. We all know about how serious issue is. We all know, people here, we are very familiar with this problem. But in the legislation is coming, we remember the previous presentation, we saw that legislation is coming, and indeed, legislation is coming. For those of you not familiarized with the legal system, you have to know that last year, the revision of the Directive of Environment was revised and was approved. And this directive from the EU has much more comprehensive vision and approach of all the environmental issues. And because it comes after the Treaty of Lisbon, we now have more tools, maybe not to make everything equal, but to harmonize the penalties, the European penalties within this territory, within the European Union. Before the Lisbon Treaty, the different regulations, the different directives could not include specific penalties in their text. And that made it possible to have very different type of fines and penalties within Europe. But now this has changed. And in the new revision of this directive, you can already find a more harmonized vision. So we've heard from Nancy, we've heard from Monica, and this makes me think about the new directive. The new directive already includes crimes with minimal years of prison, maximum years. So this is already included. I mean, of course, they won't say the specific number for every country, but there are some indications of prison sentences, and in terms of financial fines, there are also some things established, which is very important, especially in the domain of waste, because if there's, for instance, someone dies during these activities, we have a limit of 5 to 10 prison years. I'm not going to go now deep into that because that's not the topic, but I just want to say how important that is. It also kind of ties up with the Palermo Convention, but the Palermo Convention it only talks about serious crimes. And serious crimes are those who go beyond 4 years of prison under that convention. So I believe that if we try to harmonize all of these fines and years of prison, that will give us a boost within the European Union. We also see that within Europe, we have a strong cooperation between police corps, and that's a way of giving a good impulse to this kind of actors. And also, we've seen in the Monica presentation that there were some companies that were considered legal and that they were under no suspicion, but afterwards we've seen that they actually were also playing in this illegal traffic. So when we talk about sanctions, they don't always have to come from the criminal system, but there's a wide variety of sanctions that we can apply, and that's what we're trying to do. This is what Monica was talking about. How can we go after the legitimate companies that engage in this kind of illegal activities? So if the transposition is well done, and we still have some time for that, this is 1 year now to the transposition, we will have better tools. Also, there is another convention that comes from from the criminal system that has been approved by Europe, still not written, still not defined, but it goes along the lines of the directive. So if we have a good instrument in the European Union and a good text and a good treaty at an international level, we will be more powerful in tackling this kind of activities. I just wanted to make this comment. I think it's important, right? We are talking about the problem, about the issue. It's good to know that good news are coming, that new tools will be available pretty soon. And we are on the case of it. Well, that's all from me. I wanted to say this. I thought it was important to make this comment. And now we'll have a Q&A session because we have another person who wants to talk. But so we'll have now just a brief session on Q&A for Nancy and Monica, if there is one. Or doesn't have to be a question, it could be a comment as well. And if not, hearing none, well, we have Andrea here. Andrea wants to say something. Should I speak in English or in Spanish? It's for both of them. Does she have translation? Yeah, she does have a translation. This is a question for both of them, for both Nancy or Monica. First of all, thank you. Thank you for your presentations. I'm grateful to know more details about the technical aspects, not only the legal aspects, right? That's good for us because sometimes we don't know about these other things. Sometimes we are just focused on our area of expertise. So thank you. My question is, at a technical level, at a practical level, which are the measures that customs have, for instance? What do they use in their daily tasks, customs, to control, to identify those illegal plastic waste coming in? How do they do it? And I'm talking about a practical level. Is it something that they do randomly? Do they decide that every 5 containers, every 5 lorries, whatever, we will take this one? So that's something that interests me. How do we do it? Thank you.
Nancy or Monica?
Nancy or Monica?
Say something, or maybe Monica? No.
Monica, Nancy, whoever wants to talk.
Vale. Me encantaría poderte responder.
I would love to say exactly how they do it, but I am not in a good position to do that because it changes a lot. I think it's a combination of factors. So, of course, there's a lot of random checks. That's one of the things that they do with any other good. But there's another thing, which is try to see, identify vulnerabilities. They already know that some shipments or some routes or certain companies that have to be watched. I'd say that AI now is now helping a lot with those control and surveillance of shipments. In the case of, I think there was a Puel operation, they had 20 lorries coming from France or Italy every day. So how did they know that this was happening? It was just by the observation. They saw really a lot of lorries coming with an Italian reg. So that kind of puts them in alert, and this is how they started to investigate. Normally, when we talk about trafficking, there are other crimes involved. It's not when an investigation is launched, it's normally because there are several crimes being committed. And normally for 1 year, for 2 years, you have to collect evidence and see what's the modus operandi of the person or the company, so that you can go to court with a package, right? An actual package of crimes that can be looked at, if that makes sense.
Nancy, would you like to add something?
Yes. Thank you for the question. Very relevant, the role of customs. Maybe good to understand first that customs does not play a role when it comes to intra-EU traffic, because there are no border controls within the EU anymore. So the main role for customs would be on export and import. So export outside the EU or import into the EU. That first of all. Secondly, the role of customs is recognized in the EU legislation. So there is clearly a role for customs when it comes to controlling shipments of waste. It's defined in the waste shipment regulation. So legally, they also have a role. How this is implemented in EU member states is different. So in some countries, you see more involvement of customs than in other countries. There are 2 tools that can help with further refining the role of customs. So under the waste shipment regulation, countries need to prepare a inspection and enforcement plan. So these plans should also identify the role of stakeholders like customs. So EU member states are kind of obliged to think about the role of customs. And the second one that is not yet in place, but hopefully soon, is what Maria was mentioning, is the new Environmental Crime Directive. EU member states will be obliged to develop national strategies how to go about environmental crime. So also there, the role of customs should be described, I would say. So that's more on the more legal and strategic level. On the practical side, so the practical role of customs, I believe that's what you're asking for. I know that first of all, it comes down to customs being aware of the risks and the problem, and help to train them to identify possible illegal cases or suspicious cases. For example, we did a training of customs, Spanish customs in Valencia 2 years ago. And we saw after that training, we saw an increase of reports of illegal shipments out of Spain. So it's just training them and making them aware of their role already is very helpful. But in terms of tools, indeed, customs, not only for waste or environmental goods, but they work with risk profiles. So they need to develop risk assessments and threat assessments, which then will be fed into their profiling system. So they need to be aware what can be, for example, used as alternative HS codes, or what can be used as alternative descriptions that would maybe justify the risk, or the including that in a profile. So once a declaration hits certain indicators of a profile, something automatically should pop up in the customs system, say, oh, first you need to carry out an administrative check, and then based on the outcomes of that, maybe there's a need for a physical check of the load. I strongly believe that the development of this kind of profiles should be done together with other law enforcement agencies, because customs only has a limited information when it comes to, in this case, waste. So we always try to promote that these kind of risk profiles are developed together with environmental inspectorates, but also with police, because based on historic data, they can help to improve those risk profiles. So in the case of plastic waste, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a profile on 3915, because operators that would like to avoid the rules, they will use another HS code, for example. And then it's a matter of having a certain HS code combined, for example, with another indicator, the value of the load, which can increase the level of the profile and the need to carry out further investigations. And the last point is that we also know that just informants and tips, anonymous tips, also help. But yeah, this is not very common yet for environmental provision. So yeah, that in addition to what Monica was saying. Thank you.
Thank you. No tenim massa temps, però alguna pregunta més?
Any other question? I think Eugenio wanted to say something.
Gracias. No hablo mucho español.
I don't speak Spanish very well, so I'll switch into English.
First of all, let me introduce briefly myself. I'm teaching Public International Law in Italy, and I'm here as visiting professor in Tarragona. So I want to say thank you very much to the organizers of this very inspiring and stimulating conference that I found very, very interesting. And I want to say that our university, Foggia and Tarragona, signed an Erasmus agreement for mobility. So you are invited to verify the chances to come to Italy, because we have some center in the legal department, in economic department, in social science department that are very engaged in the environmental issue. Please let me also give another kind of communication that could be also interested for the participant to this conference. I'm an Italian member of the scientific board of CEPOL, which is the agency of the European Union engaged into law enforcement and sharing information and cooperation between high-rank law enforcement officers. Therefore, I'm also a member of the Scientific Bulletin, which is a peer-review, double-blinded scientific review, and I want to invite you to check the website and maybe to give your paper and your speech. Maybe Nancy and Monica, they already have some paper ready for more or less ready for publication, because we are very interesting to this issue, environmental issue, a fight against transnational crime. So you can find on the website the authors' rules and how to submit your discussion. So thanks for your attention.
Gràcies, Eugenio. Pues aquí teniu l'oferiment i us convidem a comprovar la pàgina web.
That's the invitation. And please go to their website. So without further ado, we need to move on and go to the last part of this session, which is a documentary. And after this documentary, we'll have the privilege of having Christophe Sion, who is the director of Hokusai Films, the producer, and Rafa Marase, who is a journalist and director of Porta Enrere, who is, they did promote this documentary. So we should start with the documentary now.
Perfecte. Doncs moltes gràcies. l'havíem vist, però cada vegada que el veiem com que ens surt la bèstia.
We had seen it, but it never ceases to be shocking, a wonderful documentary. I don't know if you'd like to come forward and join us.
Obrim un col·loqui.
Let's have a bit of Q&A about what we've seen and heard. That documentary confirms what we've heard this morning with Nancy and Monica's presentations with video. It's just very well done. And I think you've even answered Andrea's questions about how he's shocked. Okay. Can we have some Q&A? Is that okay? Ever since you premiered this documentary and in light of everything that's happened since then, how do you feel? Or how do you foresee that this thing will end? For us as journalists, sometimes you do investigative work that has impact and sometimes you don't. But what does not happen too often is that you do investigative journalism at that level and with that level of risk. Because as you've seen, we're not just following what the Guardia Civil is doing. We are ahead of them. This managing director that we interviewed at Guignot was arrested as part of the Refuti operation. So the Guardia Civil was following us. It was broadcast on the Catalan public television with very few resources. We made this documentary. Christoph, me, and Maria Roach, 3 people made this documentary. We were able to uncover this connection. And 3 years later, with the investigation, the Guardia Civil arrested the entire management staff of the most important waste management company in Catalonia and in Spain with an international presence. For us, we were very happy, not that people got arrested, but because it showed that we do have a problem here and the work that we had done had been worthwhile. Grignot did not want this documentary to be aired. When we premiered the documentary, the pre-premiere in Cabrils, Grignot sent an official fax to the broadcaster and our team to prevent it from being aired. A year and a half later, we realized why. And worse than that, the day after the Guardia Civil arrested Joan Grignot, Albert Mateo, and the rest of the management team, they filed suit against us. It's amazing that the day after, we think it's a mistake by their attorney. They'd been threatening us for some time because the documentary had shown, and it has a lot of different ramifications, okay? But in Lleida, they wanted to install a waste incinerator. The company developing it, one of them was Grignot, and the people in that area mobilized to prevent that. And they said, they used the documentary. They said, look what Grignot does, importing waste and so forth. So they tried to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and they threatened the ecologists in Lleida and us. We hadn't done anything about that incinerator, but we went there to give a talk. But then they sued us and the ecologist. It was surreal. 3 days later, after they filed suit, they had to withdraw it. I guess the attorney was late, and someone said, no, you have to withdraw the lawsuit because we're in jail. Anyway, this topic has only grown since then. The problem is growing. Andrea asked, what are the authorities doing? I said, well, first watch the documentary, then I'll answer you. One of the most important and interesting things that comes up in this documentary that we were told, and Christoph as well, is that with this investigation before this happened, we talked to some very important people. The Seprona officer is the highest officer of Seprona in Madrid from the Guardia Civil, the Carabinieri. We talked to him. He had been a former minister of the environment and a former head of the Carabinieri Forestal. The people in the customs office, everyone said, we're not controlling this issue. So we had a problem. We have a problem because apparently everything goes well. We have a waste agency that's doing their job, but then everything slips through the cracks. As the General Sergio Costa in Italy said, that there's no traceability. And Chasar is in Aragon. The company is in Constantí, Tarragona. The waste comes from Naples, but the importer is in Bolzano. So there comes a moment when you have to open up each truck and look inside. That's not possible. When we showed the Italian journalists that video of the Tarragona port of picking up the bales of waste and putting them directly on the truck, Antonio Musella and Amalia said, this is incredible. They don't even put it inside a container. They're loading it directly onto a ship. Yeah, but this is really brazen. They're not even trying to hide. And Christoph can talk better about this because he's a specialist. But when we were following the ships, we knew when the ship left and when it arrived. You can follow it on that app. Some of the ships, when they came to the area between Corsica and Sardinia, took a couple turns around, didn't stop anywhere, and went back to Naples, and they had not come to Tarragona. What does that mean? We can't say it, but the Nicasso gentleman, he's an anti-mafia specialist, and he has said that what the mafia that's in charge of this waste management does, when they don't know what to do, they take old ships, load them with ship, and sink them in the middle of the Mediterranean, or they leave the port, dump the waste in the Mediterranean, and go back to the port, and problem solved. So this is something that, as has been said, and this is a very important Congress for that reason, we need more regulation, more control from the authorities. For us, we have been able to wear the medal of having this great documentary made, and it's all gone well since then, but just 3 people with no resources have uncovered all this, and the whole network of police and customs and authorities, no one was able to detect it. And you've seen this in the documentary too. The president of the port of Tarragona, the whole thing about ports, we can talk about that at length, but he said, hey, who's ever responsible for the cargo is who's ever shipping it and receiving it. The port of Tarragona has no control about what comes in and out. End of story. He said, I have no control, no authority. So who pays for the effects of all this? We do. Well, I don't have much to add. You've seen a lot in the documentary, and I don't know, maybe one of you has a question for us. Yeah, I have a question. This documentary was produced several years ago, wasn't it? 2021, 2022. From 2020 to 2023. Okay, to 2023. And the waste products law was already in effect, but now there is a waste products law for circular economy in effect. So even though it's been several years since it was shot, up to now, authorities have not really reacted, and that has only lengthened the problem. But there's also been legislative changes, and some of those changes, apparently, from what we've seen in the presentations, things are going better, but it's not really a complete solution. I think that traceability continues to be the main problem. There is no traceability of the life cycle of the products or the waste, and that is where there's a big challenge. And also there must be a distinction made later on in the documentary. It doesn't talk too much about it, but it used to be that there was no fees for waste disposal in Spain, and that meant that waste that had to be managed in Catalonia were being exported outside Catalonia, Zaragoza, and some of the landfills that we saw there, and it was free or almost free, economically speaking. And there are still people who do that because the taxes aren't as high. But theoretically, with the current state or Spanish law, there is a fee, a landfill and incineration fee to discourage the export of waste products from Catalonia, that they first be recycled or recovered here or used as an energy source. But perhaps the problem was worse before when there was no landfill fee, and that problem has been cut back a little bit. But Monica has also touched on this, that there's a lot of fake documents, and that makes it difficult to control this whole thing. And the inspection agencies are too small because the director of the agency, I remember, there have been 3 presidents of the port and 3 directors of the waste product agency, waste management agency. We talk about 5,000 inspections per year, which is ridiculous. It's very low, it's insufficient. And we've also heard about the diseases that may be caused. And legally speaking, the challenge, the difficulty is to establish this causal link between improper waste management and disease to determine a true responsibility of the effects of this waste mismanagement. And that is something that is very important. So the documentary has been around a couple years, but it is still extremely current, and it shows that there's much left to do to face all the challenges that come up in the documentary and that we've seen here in this Congress. There is a waste pollution problem and a plastic waste pollution problem that is very serious. And the law is trying to address this, but it's difficult to apply. And the more regulation, the more criminality, as we've seen throughout the Congress. Yeah, one very important thing, and it also occurs not just in waste management, but any environmental management, it's a lack of information, lack of data. When we wanted to show the documentary, they were very concerned at the broadcaster. They said there's a lot of Italy in here. Why don't you talk about the effects in Catalonia and with a Catalan expert? It's because the problem is just now starting in Catalonia. In Italy, Ms. Marcela has been talking about this for decades, and until 2017, when the Attorney General and the authorities began to investigate, there was no official conclusive document. But that document was published in 2021, where the problem began in the 70s, when Maria Simone, the journalist, talks about radioactive waste in Brescia. She's not talking about the 90s. Some of them are from the 70s and 80s. The Italians have been dealing with this problem for 50 years minimum. And it turns out that the first conclusive report, the effects of these landfills, the smoke from burning these landfills, that was in 2021. So here we are hardly measuring what chemical companies produce in terms of waste, and they were from the 60s. So we need a stricter control of what is coming in, of where those landfills are, what we're exporting. But the thing is, it's not the urban waste, but inside those urban waste bales, there's all kinds of waste, solvents, everything. And one very important thing, this is from 2023, and we included a specific subtitle. As of 2023, the landfill fees must be equal throughout Spain. But when we went to interview Joan Grignot and went to his company, and you saw his style, his attitude in the documentary, that's what led to the stoppage of sending the waste to Zaragoza. The landfills in Refuti are in Ribaroja and Cuenca, and the Guardia Civil, at the same time as the document was being made, February, March, April of that year, we went in April, But then they changed their operations. They went to Riba-Roja, their own landfill, and we've been watching it, and none of the trucks were going there. We were watching. And then they end up going there, and the Guardia Civil went there, and another one in Cuenca, another of their landfills. So they have continued to export waste that they get by truck through the French border or through the Tarragona port and possibly Barcelona port. They continue to export waste. They've changed the places because they realized that they'd been caught, but they never suspended these operations. And since the Guardia Civil was watching, they ended up catching them. And the Catalan fee is still applied differently than in the rest of Spain because they didn't want to lose what has been done in Catalonia, and that could still be an incentive to export waste. Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the service, for your service to society in general, and especially those of us who are especially concerned and worried about these issues. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And like all of the, a very basic question, like all the questions I've asked so far, as I understand it, that whole network takes place between companies, public or private companies that are legal companies, right? And clearly, if waste leaves Naples and arrives in Tarragona, Levante, there's a company that belongs to the Camorra. What I'm saying is, where is, if you've seen it, the mafia in all of this, in this whole network? Where's the mafia? Which is apparently, on the surface, legal. The mafia is like when I wanted to do my thesis or my end of year project on the Masons. I said, that's hard because the Masons are very secretive. One of the main virtues of organized crime is to be as invisible as possible. In the Guardia Civil's investigation, in their press release and in their report, they refer to an international organized crime group. The Guardia Civil see that Italian organized crime is behind this. They say this in their report. When we were producing this documentary, we were concerned about that. Are we going to be able to make a link between this and the Camorra, or are we not? We could not, due to several reasons. We could not see, if we had seen someone associated with organized crime, in these operations, we would have said so, but it's always so true that people are very hesitant to give this kind of information. In the documentary, we didn't say anything that we couldn't accredit. We didn't want to get into any legal trouble. Everything we say is something we have been able to accredit. But a very important thing is to see what has happened at the police level in Italy. Nothing. The Guardia Civil has arrested the executives of a company that imports waste from Naples. The importer, the broker, is PS Service. But there's been no operation by the Carabinieri in Italy. And I can't say more than what I can say. But that doesn't mean that, I can say that there has been no activity in Italy following this documentary, because all the ones who have spoken to us could say more than what they said, and we learned much more after we did the documentary. We know much more now. When you import waste illegally, what is unthinkable? Okay, Grignot is a legal, clean company up to that time that's in this business. what we have doubts about and what the investigation shows is that it was them who began this business. They're part of a network that comes from Italy. The network comes from Italy with companies like Antonio Musella. Between 20 and 25 people who are in this business are directly or indirectly linked to criminal clans. Yes, that's why it seems incredible to me that the entire documentary, you perceive, you notice the presence of the Camorra, but they never appear. If we had been able to accredit it, we would have, but that's the most difficult part. Because where we're interviewing Emalia Simone, you can see like a little vacant lot behind her. She says, there's people buried here who have been killed by the Camorra, but it's one of the most complicated neighborhoods in Naples, okay? So as I understand it, after this operation, maybe in the not too distant future, we will see some kind of police operation in Italy. It's indicative that companies like PA Service, a legal importer or exporter, they're legal, they're brokers, and they don't want to talk to us. They said, we're doing a documentary. And you said, well, I have to think about it. They don't want to be interviewed because they know, oh, journalists coming from Spain, they don't want to be in that documentary. Is that company associated with all this? Well, it clearly is linked to Grigno because they use that broker. Is that company linked to organized crime? That I cannot confirm. But in the entire documentary, that presence is latent. And if the Guardia Civil talks about international organized crime and they're from Naples, the broker is Italian, and there hasn't been any police operation in Italy. So we'll see what happens if one ever does happen. When you reach that point, journalism, we have certain limitations. There are things we can't do. We can't walk into a company with a warrant, But it's pretty obvious what you see in the documentary and what everyone, Saprona says, can there be organized crime behind this? Yes, there can be. And he says, yes, there can be. He could also say, we don't know. Or he could say, he says, yes. It's also very difficult to disseminate the documentary in Italy. We're in contact with Italy, but there's been no way to broadcast that, to deliver it to the Italian viewership. I'm French, and in France we call it the octopus, the mafia, and that's it. The tentacles are everywhere, even though you don't see them. Just like in this room, there may be a member of the mafia. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Obviously, I'm kidding, but they could be anywhere. That's what I'm saying. You must remember that when we did the documentary, you have to remember this. It's very important. We worked undercover a lot when we went to talk to the Guardia Civil. They didn't know what we were investigating. Everyone we talked to, we said, we're talking about sustainability. That's why we went to Grigno. We are coming to interview you because we didn't say, oh, we think you are importing garbage illegally. No. One thing that we were very clear on was that this is a very delicate matter. A lot of millions of euros are at stake, and no one can know what we're doing because we aren't anybody to be talking about this. We have to be discreet. That has to be the best weapon because we knew it was a dangerous matter, not just that we might get sued, but above all because the people affected would change their operations as they did, as we saw in the Guardia Civil report. And then the danger for us, we knew that behind this, that's why we talked to Saviano. We were touching on one of the most best-known historic businesses of Italian organized crime. And when they said that there were ships full of garbage coming from Naples to Tarragona, the first thing we thought of was Gomorra. And you can read it in the book. And we had to think about what are the figures behind this in Italy. That can only be answered by a future police investigation. We went as far as we could. Perhaps there should be a part 2 to this documentary. We'd need a lot more cooperation from the Italians, that's for sure. Allow me to ask something else. At any time, I would have expected to see some Italian at the port of Tarragona, and I didn't see anything. I started watching it, assuming that the mafia was behind all this, that you can. Well, there's two things here. In a Hollywood movie, it would have ended up with the mafioso being arrested in the port and the police coming in by helicopter and all that. But the thing about this business, the illegal business, is that Sergio Costa, the Carabinieri general, says it's all very parceled out. That way, it's very difficult. It's so fragmented. This business has been going on for 40, 50, 60 years. It's all been thought out for you to lose track of this stuff as it moves from one place to another. Who's behind this? Maybe in northern Italy, maybe it's in southern Italy, maybe it's in a little flat somewhere in Naples. We don't know who's behind it. And they're never going to show their face. They always use people who are clean. I'm just a businessman. And those are the people they use. Those people don't carry guns. They don't shoot it up in the street. But behind them, SACNA is a public organization in Naples. It's like the Catalan Waste Agency in Naples. And they don't want to be interviewed by us. How could that be? They didn't want it. They must have something to hide. They are the ones who have to monitor waste in Naples, and they don't want to talk to us. They said, oh, we're too busy. They didn't even answer our emails. And we sent it many times. We talked to them on the phone several times, and they never wanted to sit down for an interview. And the president of the Port of Tarragona, who was at the end of his term, he was the last person we interviewed because he never wanted to talk to us. He could tell what we were going to ask him. He didn't want to look bad because we already had the video of the Tarragona port trash being unloaded. And now he's an MP in the Spanish parliament. Oh, yeah. And I remember when the documentary premiered, the TV3 producer, the Catalan broadcaster. I'll do it in Catalan if it's okay. I'm having a hard time speaking Spanish. TV3, this Catalan broadcaster, asked us to delay the documentary because elections, we're about to have elections. I don't know if they were municipal elections or 2023. There were some elections coming up. And since there were some politicians in the documentary, she was afraid that this could influence people's sentiment and the way they voted, their intention. And we said, look, this is a documentary about waste. What do you mean? But even to that level, there was concern. Well, here's another story. How will the mafioso come out in the documentary if the politicians don't want to be in it? Mafioso had nothing to gain. People should know that they're a mafioso. They can only lose. But the politician may or may not be good. But before the broadcast of the documentary, before or maybe shortly after, they went to do a report in Tarragona about something else. The president of the port complained about us. What had we come to ask him? And I had to report back to my boss. The Catalan broadcaster was really worried. They don't usually show these kinds of documentaries. Now they adore us, but at that time they were really worried. And the president of the port complained about us because we went there and asked these uncomfortable questions. He complained to the reporters who went there for something else. And she told the leaders of the broadcaster, they called us and we had to go in there and explain ourselves and answer questions about this. You must understand that it's not just a matter of private companies. They are very much involved, but also a lack of control. And some of the ecologists say this. It makes you suspect many things. That lack of resources, who benefits from that? The documentary, the original documentary, we wanted this word unsustainable was because our lifestyle, our whole lifestyle is unsustainable, generating all this waste. It's unsustainable, clearly. But when we saw it wasn't so generic, but it had a very specific story behind it, we followed it. But the problem is the model. China, as we heard earlier, as of 2018, they stopped receiving waste. They said there's a big problem. Now, where's the waste going? To the cheapest destination. Where is the cheapest destination in Europe? Spain. And where is the cheapest in Spain? Tarragona or Cuenca. And Catalonia has a key role because the headquarters are in Catalonia, and it's not 40,000 tons. It's not 40,000 tons as we've heard. It's 40,000 tons per year. And the Guardia Civil investigation lasted 4 years, so it's 160,000 tons. That's what the Guardia Civil estimates. It's been in the media, 40,000 tons every year for 4 years. So 160,000 tons that they are able to calculate. It's probably more. We saw much more. And one last thing. Due to the lack of control and administration, at the beginning of the documentary, we showed some data. The increase of import of Italian waste in Catalonia, that's official data. You can get that data. We requested it specifically because for transport data, it takes months and months. They don't want to give it to you and so forth. But we have a report from the director of the agency, who's now someone else. It specified that Grigno had imported 68% of those 460,000 tons from Italy in the Board of Facts that they wanted to stop the broadcast of the documentary. They said, no, it's only 80,000, but we still use the report from the agency. But the next year, following the broadcast of the documentary, I asked the Waste Management Agency for more information to see the evolution of the waste from 2014. And when it came to 2021, 2022, I saw that it was half of the waste. It was half of it that they reported, or less than half than what they had reported. And I wrote them and said, listen, I think there's a mistake here because I have another document that says that it's 480,000 tons and it's half of it. And they never answered. And they took a long time and they said, yeah, we did make a mistake. The documentary was broadcast. They saw it. No one said anything. And later I investigated. And they said, yeah, it was a mistake by 200 or 300,000 tons. So they sent me a very complex report. And they said that the files are always alive. They're open. The case files. And I said, well, I want to look at the case file. And they said, no, there's many fewer tons. And we state this at the beginning, at the end of the documentary. But the thing is, not even they control their own documentations. If you saw that documentary at home and everyone in the industry saw it, and I've said this a couple of times, the commander of Seprona, the Guardia Civil in Madrid, sent me a WhatsApp message 5 days later saying amazing, and it's in Catalan. He doesn't speak Catalan, but he watched it anyway. And I said, listen, that's a lot of tons, and no one said anything. And it wasn't until the year later they didn't see this, that the amount of tons were off. You know, didn't the authorities see this? I don't know what to say.
In terms of the legal system, we know that this is a very complex problem. What I know is that Griño is not very quiet. This company, they have hired the best lawyers in Barcelona for this case, 3 different firms. And so they are not quiet. And I know they're going to push the limits of the legal system. It's going to be interesting to see as a jurist, right? But probably from the environmental side, not so interesting, because I know they are good lawyers. They are top lawyers, the ones you hired. So they are not quiet. This company is not really quiet. Of course, they charge millions. These jurists, it's not that they're going to do this for free, but yeah, but they also make a lot of money. That's an industry that moves 10,000 millions a year. And it's true, when they've seen that they could go to prison, they hired top lawyers in Spain. Of course they did. And I'm not pessimistic. I'm not happy when I see other people down. It's not that, but environmental crimes, sometimes they are seen as minor crimes. So it's good that sometimes things like this happen so that we see the magnitude. I am a bit of a pessimistic because historically in Spain, it has been very difficult to bring people to prison or to make that people pay for environmental crimes. And I'm sure that you are familiar with some cases. This case is being judged in Tarragona initially, but he has tried to imply the Lleida courts because the company has offices in Lleida, but they don't want to be implied in Lleida. So now the higher authority of the justice in Catalonia needs to make a decision on that. But the judge in Lleida, which is where they actually have their headquarters, he said they don't want to know about that. Why? Because it's a powerful company in the territory, and of course they're going to be impacted. And then what happens with the Italian side of things? We can see anything, because that's the origin of this journey of our waste. And I don't like this situation, because it seems that the courts that are going to deal with this, it's against the will that they're going to take this case, because judges are people in the end. They are people. And either you take things with a will and with passion, or you don't. And let's not forget that in the other side, you're going to have powerful lawyers that go after you. So we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. Still, we don't have still don't know what happens. And we'll see. I'm not completely sure that the judgment is going to take place. Maybe it's being put aside. Regardless of that, I just want to reiterate my thanks. And you said that the new directive is much more holistic, this and so on. And I know that we're working a lot on prevention. Before, we only had this prevention. But now it's good that this kind of cases become known amongst the general public. One of the problems that we have in environmental law is that the general public is unaware of their daily decisions, the things they do in their daily lives. This is exactly what we want to do with this kind of things. Administrative law tries to prevent these things, and they of course they know that the double accusation is not available, but we do have a new European regulation on administrative law as well, and I think that they're trying to put the focus and move the focus on prevention and more penalties, more sanctions, of bigger amounts of money as well. Yeah, but I have to say, that there's going to be new thresholds. And I already said that in my introduction. I don't think the prison is a solution to anything. We know about that. We jurists know about that, that prison is not a solution for anything. However, if you have longer sentences, longer time duration of prison, it's just that kind of puts you in place when you're thinking of committing crimes. There is something that I see every day. It is important that, as journalists, that's a job. Christophe, myself, we've done a very, very, very brave thing. I know that some journalists wouldn't want to go near this kind of topics, but we decided to do it. Even if you talk to a nice production company in Spain, Catalonia, this idea, nobody wanted to go near that. Nobody wanted to do in art. They get scared. They are scared. They are terrified. And there's another part that it comes from us, journalists. It's true. We have a role to play. But there's another thing. Common people, like public, general public. How do we know? Because someone from the JPEG tells us about that. But there are so many things that we don't know about. And journalists and justice could make much more if we were not scared. Fear is one of the main breaks on society. All of these people, a lot of these things have been happening in clear air, open air, and no one has said anything. In Tarragona, we have another corruption cases in other domains, and that's what we try to do. That's the message we try to convey. If we didn't have informants, if we didn't have those kind of tips, we would never have known about that. A boat, yeah, okay, I see a boat coming, but I don't know what's going on there. So that's my message. The message I want to convey is that people have to be brave and have to trust on journalists like ourselves. Otherwise, we're missing out on a lot of things that go against us, that are detrimental to ourselves. And we see this happening as well with public money and well, that's just my message. I think that it's working. It's us. We are behind schedule. There's a lot of people working in this Congress, and we are out of time. Perhaps Nancy, Monica, I'm not sure if they are still here, or someone else wants to say something. A final comment. That we might have time for that, but that's the only thing that we could do, because now I think it's time to probably put an end to this session, maybe with Aitana's word, Aitana's comments. I just want to say that we can be very satisfied, and we are very happy with how things have gone with this Congress. As I said, this Congress is becoming, or we want to be the final chapter of the JustCircular project that's been going on for the last 4 years. Of course, there's a lot of things to do. I want to say thank you to all of the attendees, especially those who've come here face to face, all the different speakers that we had, both here and online, and obviously all of the people involved in the organization of this Congress. We have also registered the session, and I hope that's not a problem. And that's going to be posted in our website. We will have a link there for our sessions. And we'll be very happy for you to go and replay it. People who have been registered, of course, they have their certificates, and that's all. Just the final message is there's a lot of things to do. We still have a lot of things to do, as I say, but at least we can talk and ask ourselves questions more than having answers. Maybe we don't have the answers, but we won't give up on this fight against this plastic waste. Thank you. One last thing, there's food available here in the bar of the faculty. And this is on us, of course. But if you have other plans, no problem at all. You can do whatever you want. Thank you. And we will be in touch. Thank you to our technician, Carlos, who's been here 2 years, and the interpreting team. And I know that there's more people. Thank you. We decided to include Catalan, Spanish, and that's good, and English, because people can talk in this language. Thank you.